Jon Snow stood at the edge of the Frostfangs, the jagged mountains rising in uneven steps behind him. He could feel the cold wind brushing against his cheeks, each gust carrying a sting reminiscent of old buried memories. The breath that left his lips coiled in thin wisps, dissolving into the twilight that filled the sky. He was dressed in layered furs, the leather beneath them worn and scratched, a testament to the miles and battles he had endured. There was a stillness in the air, as if the very mountains held their breath in anticipation of what was to come. A single torch flickered behind him, held aloft by a young wildling woman who looked to him with wide, anxious eyes. For a moment, Jon could almost pretend they were merely on a scouting mission, that this was just another knight preparing to defend the wall. But they had left the wall behind. This time, they were the invaders. He had not anticipated this path when he first joined the Night's Watch, as a boy longing for a place in the world. He never would have imagined raising a war host composed of the free folk, those who answered to no kings. Yet here he was, standing at the threshold between the land he had once sworn to defend and the promise of a future that might finally unify both worlds. He had seen too much blood spilled, too many broken oaths and hollow victories. Now he sought something else, to shape a realm where everyone could survive without walls, no matter their birth. But to reach that future, he had to march south. He had to do the unthinkable, lead the Wildlings on an invasion of Westeros. A few paces behind him, Tormund Giantsbane lowered his broad shoulders and exhaled a thick breath. The wind played in his fiery beard, and his gruff laugh was missing, replaced by a solemn tension. They had set out with only a handful of fighters at first, mostly trusted folk Jon had known from the conflicts against the White Walkers. But as soon as word spread of Jon's call, more free folk had come down from their scattered camps, willing to follow him through the treacherous mountain passes and across that snow-laden expanse between the wall and the first castles of the north. Perhaps they followed him because of the name he once carried, Warden of the North, or perhaps they followed him because he had proven that, though bound by the Watch's vows, he had never truly turned against them. Whichever reason it was, the result remained the same. Hundreds, then thousands of wildlings gathering with spears, axes, bows, and an unbreakable resolve to fight for a land that had scorned them for centuries. He could see the faint glow on the southern horizon, where lesser peaks dissolved into rolling hills. The sun had dipped, leaving only a smear of burnt orange light. A hush had fallen upon the encampment, a rare thing, for the free folk usually filled the night with singing, cursing, or bold boasts around their fires. But tonight, they listened to the wind, waited for Jon to give a sign, or perhaps for the gods, old, new, or nameless, to speak through the crackle of the torches. Each tent, made of hides and patched cloth, stood as a testament to the resourcefulness of the people who lived beyond the wall, the people who had survived that endless winter and fought abominations from nightmares. Now those tents dotted the foothills like stubborn mushrooms pushing through snowdrifts, each one containing families, children, and the aged, not just warriors. It wasn't just an army preparing to march. It was an entire way of life looking for a new home. Jon found himself reminded of the night before the Battle of the Bastards, how he had tried to snatch a few hours of sleep, but had been unable to quiet his thoughts. Tonight was different, yet eerily the same. Once again, he carried the weight of making decisions that could decide the fate of thousands. Once again he sensed that something momentous stood before him. Even the cold seemed to mirror that earlier time, the air tasting of old regrets and uncertain hopes. But now, there was no Davos to share a final piece of counsel, no Sansa to argue strategy, no Red Woman weaving cryptic prophecies. It was just Jon and Tormund, along with a handful of other chieftains and spearwives, forging the next step in a journey that would not be easily undone. He heard a crunch of snow underfoot behind him and knew Tormund approached. "Any word from the scouts?" Jon asked, without turning around. His voice came out low, almost lost in the wind's wail. Tormund's breath clouded the air beside him. "They said the Umber lands are mostly barren this time of year. No large hosts posted on the outskirts. Lord Umber must be holed up in Last Hearth, if he's still about." He paused a moment, shifting his weight. "But there's rumor of a heavy presence further south. Could be that the new Warden of the North got wind of our movements." Jon nodded slowly. He had expected as much, though he hadn't held the title of king in the north for long, or at all, depending on whom you asked. There were enough in the realm who recalled his ties to House Stark, enough who might view him as a threat, or worse, as a traitor for rallying the free folk. "We'll rest one more night here," he said. "Let the last of our stragglers catch up. At dawn, we move." Tormund's grunt carried a note of approval. "Just be ready for what it means to break into the north with an army of wildlings. The crows aren't going to welcome us with open arms." Jon's gaze found the dark horizon. "I know," he said quietly, and the wind swallowed the rest of his words. He heard Tormund walk away, leaving him alone to stare into the distance, where the north began. In his mind, he saw Winterfell's gates opening to receive him. But the vision was clouded by the memory of battles past. Undanai. The word had a hollow ring. He was, once again, a wanderer without a banner. Night stretched over the camp in layers of starless darkness. Snow crunched, tents rustled. Few dared to light fires, worried that even a distant glow might betray their position. Yet small flickers burned here and there, the risk worth it for a taste of warmth. Within the largest tent near the center, Jon sat beside Tormund and Morna Stoneeye, a wrinkled spearwife who had followed Mance Rayder back in the day and who now pledged her loyalty to Jon. Thick pelts circled them, doing little to seal out the creeping cold. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the tent supports. "South of the Umber lands, we have the Dreadfort," Morna said in her rasping voice. "Word is that the Boltons are no more, but that doesn't make the place any less cursed." She tapped her spear butt against the frozen ground in emphasis. "We're better off skirting the place entirely if we can. I'd rather face hungry wolves than set foot on those ramparts." Tormund snorted. "The crows might have a different plan for us. If they've placed a new castellan there or some opportunistic house took it over, we'll have to be wary of a trap." Jon ran a hand over the stubble on his jaw. "There's no easy road south. We could try going west, but then we risk crossing paths with House Serwyn or the Manderleys. East, and we're trapped by the sea. The direct route is through Last Hearth, then deeper into the north. Either we ask for safe passage, or we take it. Neither option will be simple." "Nistram." Morna shook her head, the bones in her hair clattering. "Ask. Since when do we ask the Kneelers for their permission to walk?" He looked at her, recalling how strongly the free folk prized their independence. That spirit, while admirable, had always been a barrier to peace. "No one said we would kneel," Jon answered. "But a direct conflict in the open fields would cost us too much. The numbers may be close to even, but they have cavalry, walls, and knowledge of the land. We'd lose more than we'd gain if we try to smash through an entire host of northerners." Tormund chewed the inside of his cheek. "So we play nice then? Pretend we come in peace?" Jon's eyes flickered. He wasn't sure if "in peace" accurately described their intentions. They meant to settle. That often meant conflict when land and resources were scarce. He thought about the long road behind them, east of the Thens, near Hardhome, near the Fist of the First Men. There was never enough land. But that was the old way when the free folk believed Westeros wouldn't accept them. Maybe it was still the same. "I'll decide in the morning," he said. "Get some rest. We leave at first light." When they parted, each retreating to their own corner of darkness, Jon sank onto a pile of furs. He took a moment to rub his temples, chasing away a forming headache. In the quiet, the ghosts of memory gathered around him. He saw the face of his father. Ned Stark, or the man he believed was his father for so long. He saw Robb, the king who met a bloody fate at the Twins. And he saw Ygritte, the wildling woman who had once captured his heart, and taught him that the world was far more complicated than any vow could encompass. She had died in his arms during the battle at Castle Black. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet he could still feel the warmth of her breath. Now, leading her people, he carried a part of her memory with him. His eyes shut for what felt like only moments. Then the tent flap rustled, letting in a sliver of dawn's cold blue light. A young boy, no older than 12, stood hesitantly at the entrance, shifting from foot to foot. "Your pardon, my lord," he said, "but Tormund asked me to fetch you. The scouts have returned." Jon blinked away the heaviness of sleep. nodded, and rose. He dusted snow and stray fur from his cloak, stepped out into the biting morning air. The sun hid behind a sky of iron-gray clouds. The wildling camp stirred, faint smoke rising from small cooking fires. A group of children giggled as they passed around something to eat, while older men and women hurried to pack up tents, douse embers, and gather supplies. He saw Tormund standing near a half-frozen stream. By his side stood 4 scouts in various states of exhaustion. They saw horsemen on the horizon last night, Tormund reported. Men with banners, though they couldn't make out which. They rode south before dawn. Our scouts also spotted watchers in the trees east of here, likely House Umber's outriders. Jon listened carefully, imagining the map in his mind. They know we're here, he said, though it was more a confirmation of the inevitable than a sudden realization. Then we have no time to waste. If the Umbers are sending word to others, we'll soon have a host to face. Tormund grinned toothily, shifting the grip on his axe. A good fight, then. Jon shook his head. We won't fight unless we must. Gather the chieftains. He paused, glancing around at the bustle and swirl of activity. We move soon. The camp mobilized with an efficiency honed by countless evictions from harsh lands. Within an hour, the tents were gone, the supplies loaded onto crude sledges, or carried on the backs of stout garrons and woolly oxen. Women in furs led lines of children by the hand, cautioning them not to stray. Men strapped crude iron swords to their belts. Some had only wooden clubs with shards of obsidian embedded in them. A few archers slung bows across their shoulders. All of them looked to Jon Snow, waiting for his lead. He stood at the head of the procession, Ghost at his side. The direwolf, towering and white as snow, padded silently, his red eyes scanning the ranks. Jon had found him again months ago, or perhaps Ghost had found Jon. Either way, their bond remained as strong as ever. On the day Jon had decided to break his final ties to the Night's Watch to guide the Wildlings to better lands, Ghost had been there, a silent guardian. Now, as they prepared to cross into the domain Jon had once called home, Ghost appeared more alert than ever, as though sensing the tension that cloaked Jon's every breath. They moved as one, descending from the Frostfangs in a serpentine line. Snow crunched underfoot, and the occasional hiss of wind buffeted them from the east. Jon kept his eyes on the terrain ahead. He knew that once they left the mountains behind and came onto the open plains, their presence would be impossible to conceal. That was where they would be most vulnerable. The first few leagues took them past outcroppings of rock and patches of ice, so slick that even the sure-footed free folk slipped. Shouts of warning and caution rang through the line, but no one ventured to complain. They had endured worse. When the sun began to climb higher, the gray in the sky brightened to a muted silver, and the land sprawled open before them, a stark white plain leading to the dark silhouettes of distant forests. Jon called a halt at the edge of a frozen river, instructing the forward scouts to go on ahead. His breath puffed in quick intervals as he surveyed the route. Once, when he had ridden south as a member of the Night's Watch, he never thought about the logistics of moving so many people. The Watch had their supply lines, their unity. But now, thousands followed him, many with limited resources. He had to ensure they had water, a place to rest, enough food to get them through another day. The ephemeral nature of leadership weighed on him like chain links, each link a voice, a life, a child's future. If they starved, if they froze, if they fell to an ambush, he would bear the guilt. Half an hour passed before the scouts returned, winded and dusted with frost. Their leader, a tall woman with streaks of white in her braids, pointed south. There's a small village yonder, no more than a cluster of hovels. But we saw smoke rising. Could be a settlement has formed since last winter. Nay. Jon heard Tormund shift restlessly. We need provisions, Tormund muttered. And we need to know if the Northerners are massing an army. Jon nodded grimly. He was torn. The free folk were suspicious of any outsiders, but to keep marching without securing some kind of supplies would be foolish. We approach cautiously, he said, and we do no harm unless they strike first. They reached the village by midday, a ring of rickety wooden huts and one stone building at the center. The place looked half abandoned. A handful of villagers, wrapped in thick cloaks, stood at the edge of a frozen well. When they saw the oncoming horde, their faces turned to masks of terror. Jon rode forward alone, his gloved hand raised in a sign of peace. The villagers huddled back, uncertain of what to make of him or the silent, broad-chested warriors that followed. He introduced himself as best he could, voice raised but calm. "We want no trouble. We only need rest and food for our people." He could feel the eyes of his companions drilling into his back, doubting the wisdom of such open courtesy. An old man, clearly the elder of this small community, stepped forward, staff in hand. He squinted up at Jon, then turned his gaze to the rest of the horde. "A wildling army in the north?" he croaked. "I've lived long enough to see every madness come to pass." "And who are you to speak for them?" Jon hesitated, remembering how once he might have used the name Stark to gain some measure of trust. Now that name felt distant. "I'm Jon Snow," he said. "We mean you no harm." The elder's eyes widened a fraction. "Snow. Once a bastard of Winterfell, are you not?" Jon's breath caught, but he nodded. His jaw tensed as he wondered how quickly the old rumors of his resurrection, or his desertion of the Night's Watch, might stir fear or anger. The old man let out a weary sigh. "We've heard tales. We've heard of your deeds, boy. And we've heard how you led the Wildlings south of the wall before." Jon sensed a murmur ripple through the free folk behind him. They were not used to being spoken of as though they were an invading plague, but they had grown accustomed to some measure of hostility. "If you'll share what spare provisions you have, we'll pay you back twice over when the season turns." A tired laugh came from the old man. "We're poorer folk, Snow. We have naught but salted fish and potatoes. You'll find no gold here, no lavish feast." He glanced at the ranks of men, women, and children. "Still, I can't well send you on your way to starve." Then, more softly, "I'll gather what we can." Jon thanked him, feeling relief wash over him for the moment. He motioned for everyone to set up a temporary camp on the outskirts. They would not overstay. While the villagers hurried about, bundling small sacks of food, Jon joined Tormund in walking the perimeter, checking if there were any signs of soldiers or hidden threats. The village sat near a cluster of pine trees, the heavy boughs drooping with snow. A pair of hounds barked, their chain rattling, but no immediate danger lurked. The anxious faces in the huts remained, peering out through half-frozen windows. As they gathered a meager meal, dried fish, some root vegetables, Jon spoke with the elder once more. "Have you had visitors? Soldiers or riders passing through, carrying a banner?" "Messundan." The old man shrugged. "We've seen a few men wearing the Umber sigil. They come around collecting tolls or news, but I expect them to return soon. They always do, if they see your people here." Jon understood the implication. The Umbers might see it as a rebellion or a threat, and the entire village could suffer. "We won't linger," Jon promised. "By sundown we'll be gone." And so they ate quickly, sharing rations among themselves. Women with hollow cheeks watched their children devour the meager portions, each trying to save a bite or two for tomorrow. Morna Stone-Eye commented on the pitiful state of their supplies, but Jon reminded her that it was better than nothing. He knelt to help an older man bundle a package of salted fish, feeling a faint pang at how drastically the roles had reversed. Once, he was a sworn brother protecting the realm from raiders. Now, he was leading the outsiders, relying on humble folks' charity. That, if anything, was a testament to how fluid loyalties could become. They left the village just as the light of the sun began to dim once more, forging a path westward where the land gradually sloped, scattered with more pine and fir trees. Jon wished they could have stayed the night, but he dared not endanger the villagers any further. With the Umbers patrolling these lands, every hour spent near that village could mean inviting retribution on those innocent souls. Dusk arrived, painting the sky in shades of purple and blue. The Wildlings kept moving until the ground rose into gentle hills. There, they made a temporary camp, leaning wooden poles for structures, draping furs and hides for shelter. Jon felt the fatigue in his bones. Half the march was spent in fear of encountering a mounted patrol, half in uneasy silence. At least the night offered a cloak of sorts. The small fires they built were carefully hidden behind rock formations or the slopes of the hills. Ghost prowled at the edges of the camp, quietly watching for anything that might threaten them. As darkness settled, Jon stood near one of the smaller fires, warming his hands. He heard Tormund approach by the heavy footfall. The large man plunked down beside him, letting out a breath that formed a cloud in the frigid air. "We march on," Tormund said, half to himself. "But do we know where? Winterfell? Are we to take the seat of the Starks by force?" Jon closed his eyes. "If we march on Winterfell, it will be to bargain, not to conquer." He could feel Tormund's skeptic gaze burning into his profile. "We want a home," Tormund thought. "That's it. The free folk need a place to live and prosper. What good is taking castles we can't hold? The moment we shed blood needlessly, the entire North will rally against us." "Not of me." Tormund scratched his beard, then sighed. "I miss the old days in a sense. Life was simpler with fewer choices. But that's the price, isn't it? I'll follow your lead, Jon Snow, even if it means bending some pride." Morna approached next, her voice low. "One of my scouts reported movement a few miles east. Figures in the dark, possibly men on horseback, but he couldn't be sure. They seemed to vanish into the trees." Jon absorbed the information, nodding gravely. "We'll post double the watch. If they come, we'll meet them ready. If not, we move again at dawn." He realized each day they spent like this was another day in limbo. They were neither accepted by the North nor actively hunted, yet. He knew that would change soon. Enough rumors of an army of free folk traveling south would spark panic. If the houses of the North united under a single leader, it could spell ruin for the free folk before they even had a chance to negotiate. But he clung to a sliver of hope that somewhere, somehow, cooler heads might prevail. In the quiet of the camp, he took a moment to reflect on what it was he truly wanted. Unity, peace, and an end to the ceaseless cycle of violence that defined the relationship between those beyond the wall and those within it. But he was also realistic. He knew the North was not likely to lay out a welcome feast for them. Not after generations of horror stories about wildling raiders. He thought of Sansa and Arya, wondered where they might be, if they still called Winterfell home. If they saw him now, what would they think? Sleep bound him in fits that night, broken by every rustle of branches or distant howl. In his dreams, he stood atop the wall, looking down upon a vast sea of people, wildlings, northerners, even men of the Night's Watch, some reaching up to him in supplication, others in rage. The wall began to crumble, each stone falling away, leaving him suspended in a cold void. When he awoke, heart pounding, the fire near him had burned to embers, and Ghost lay at his feet. Ears perked. Morning dawned behind thick clouds that threatened more snow. The free folk, stoic and accustomed to hardship, wasted no time. They packed the camp swiftly, faces set with determination. Rumors spread that some outriders had been spotted in the night, but no one had attacked. It was only a matter of time before the Watchers reported back to their lords, though. Jon took the lead again, pushing them forward. Each mile they covered meant they were closer to Winterfell, and closer to the reality of confrontation. They reached a small crossroads by midday, little more than a sunken path that split into two directions. One way curved west toward the Barrowlands. The other cut south through a forest that might lead them closer to Last Hearth. Jon paused at the junction, scanning for signs. The roads were iced over with patches of frozen mud. Tracks, hoofprints, wagon wheels could be seen in the thinner snow, but it was hard to read which direction they led. This was the moment. If they went west, they might avoid the more populated holdings and try to come around from the south. But that route risked running into White Harbor's domain, House Manderly's territory, which could potentially field a strong force. If they went east, they'd skirt too close to the Dreadfort's old land. The direct route through the Umberland was the path they were already on. Tormund spat on the ground. Bloody crows. Always building roads to lead to their fancy castles. He stared at Jon, awaiting his decision, as did Morna and the rest of the free folk who gathered behind them. Tension in the air was palpable. like a taut bowstring ready to snap. Jon fixed his eyes on the southern path. We keep to our course. If the Umbers confront us, we'll meet them. But let it be on open ground where we can speak first. He felt a quiver in his stomach, uncertainty gnawing at him. But he knew that to wander too far afield now would only complicate matters. They needed a direct approach if they had any chance of brokering an agreement. So they proceeded. The forest on either side of the path stood silent, pines and oaks stripped by winter. The bare branches formed a skeletal canopy overhead. Children walked hand in hand, fear shining in their eyes. Mothers held them close, scanning the trees as if expecting arrows to fly at any moment. A hush had fallen over the entire column. Even Tormund, usually full of brash humor, marched with silent vigilance, his hand never straying far from the hilt of his axe. They made camp that evening near a shallow stream, partially iced over. Jon watched as a group of wildlings broke the ice and gathered water in skin pouches, careful to maintain enough for everyone's ration. The clouds overhead threatened snowfall again, and a few flurries drifted lazily, glittering in the last remnants of daylight. "We press on tomorrow," Jon announced to the chieftains. "We can't afford to linger in one place for too long." Morna nodded. "We'll be ready." Then she frowned, a line carving deeper on her brow. "But we're running low on food. The fish from that village won't last us more than a few days if we ration heavily." Jon swallowed the knot in his throat. "We'll hunt in the forests as we move." He knew that might not be enough. The land in winter held few creatures, and competition for game was fierce. But they had no choice. Starvation would force them to do desperate things, which would only make a peaceful outcome less likely. He bent down, running his fingers through Ghost's fur, seeking some semblance of comfort in the direwolf's presence. A scattering of crows burst from the trees at the far edge of camp, their caws echoing. Tormund narrowed his eyes. "That's an ill omen," he muttered, glancing at Jon. "Crows always mean watchers." As if to confirm his words, a horn's low note drifted through the air. A single, mournful cry from somewhere beyond the tree line. Every wildling froze, muscles tensed, eyes wide. The memory of the horn blasts that once signaled White Walkers, or the Watch itself, still lingered in the Free Folk's collective fear. Jon scanned the perimeter, heart hammering in his chest. A second horn blast resonated, carrying a shiver that ran up Jon's spine. This wasn't the call for the dead. This was a call for men to gather, men who meant to challenge them. The Free Folk drew their weapons, forming makeshift ranks. Jon saw mothers shepherding children behind sledges, older men and women clutching spears in trembling hands. The entire camp braced for the unknown. They waited in tense silence, breath puffing in short bursts, the air crackling with the potential for violence. From the dark edge of the woods, riders emerged. At least a dozen, maybe more, carrying torches that glowed in the twilight. Their banners were difficult to make out in the gloom, but soon Jon spotted the sigil. A roaring giant, the mark of House Umber. Jon stepped forward slowly, hand on the pommel of Longclaw, with Tormund a step behind him. Ghost let out a low growl. The riders halted, torchlight revealing bearded faces under heavy hoods. At the center was a man with broad shoulders and a thick mane of auburn hair, braided in the old northern style. "Halt where you stand," the auburn-haired man called out, lifting his torch higher. "You've entered Umber land without leave. We have bows and steel at the ready. If you value your lives, you'll speak your purpose." Jon cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady and strong. "I'm Jon Snow," he announced, formerly of Winterfell, once a brother of the Night's Watch. "We mean no harm to the north. We ask only for safe passage south." "Them ten." The man on the horse let out a scoffing laugh. "A bastard once, a deserter thrice, and now an invader at the head of a wildling host. Forgive me if I find your words lacking. You've brought an army here. Safe passage to do what? Raid our lands?" Jon met the man's gaze unflinchingly. "We have no interest in raiding. My people seek new lands to settle, away from the endless winter beyond the wall." A murmur arose among the riders. One of them spat on the ground. "So you admit you plan to steal our lands? That's rich." Tormund growled. "We steal nothing. We only want to live." His grip tightened on his axe, but Jon set a hand on his shoulder, calming him. The auburn-haired man studied them for a moment. Then he lifted his hand in a signal, and more riders emerged from the trees behind him. An entire flank. The free folk responded with tense readiness, shifting their spears, knocking arrows. Jon felt the entire situation teeter on a razor's edge. One wrong move, one frightened youth letting an arrow fly, and they'd be bathing the snow in blood. "Listen to me," Jon called, his voice echoing. "We aren't here to conquer. That's not our purpose. We want to talk. Take me to your lord, or bring him here, so I can speak. I've been Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I've been Warden of the North. Everything I've done was to protect the realm from a greater threat. The White Walkers are gone, but winter still lingers, and these people need a future." Then together. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. The torches sputtered, dancing with the wind. Finally the man scowled, his eyes scanning the hundreds of wildlings, noticing not just warriors but old men, children, mothers. "My lord is dead, Crow," the man spat. "Killed in the war. We follow his son now, or what's left of him. But I can take word back. Don't think for a moment we'll simply let you pass." "No." Jon bowed his head slightly. "Do what you must. But I'll wait here for a chance to speak peace. We could shed blood tonight, or we could find a way forward. The choice is yours." A grim silence followed. The man looked at his companions, as though weighing the cost. Then, with a rough yank on the reins, he turned his horse. "Hold your ground here," he ordered, voice carrying to the riders behind him. "I'll send a raven. If our new lord wills it, we'll treat with you. But step 1 foot further without permission, and you'll find yourselves gutted like fish." Jon stepped back, letting the man and a few of his riders disappear into the gloom. The others remained, forming a half-circle around the forest edge, torches raised. A standstill. Tormund shook his head. "We're penned in, caged like we're savage dogs. You really think they'll let us through?" Jon exhaled slowly. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if we try to force our way through, we become exactly what they say we are. Raiders, murderers. We must do this carefully." Morna tightened her grip on her spear. "If it comes to blood, we won't cower, Jon Snow." He gave a slow nod. "I know, but I'd rather avoid it if we can." And so they stood, the free folk quietly forming a defensive circle around their children and the sledges, as Umber riders stood guard in the fading light. Night descended in a hush, the glow of torches playing across the snow, and Jon wondered just how precarious this new dawn of possibility truly was. He could almost feel the realm itself holding its breath, waiting to see if a bastard-turned wildling champion could negotiate peace, or if another War of the North would be written into bloody history. Night fell heavy and absolute, shrouding the forest in a deep quiet, broken only by the crackle of distant torches and the rasp of frozen branches scraping against one another. Jon stood in the half-light, feeling the weight of so many eyes on him. Wildling warriors clutching their makeshift weapons, anxious mothers whispering to children, and not far beyond, the Umber riders lurking at the edges of the clearing. A fragile stalemate held them in place, one that could turn deadly if a single arrow flew. He felt the ghosts of old wars crowd in his mind. He remembered how easily tension could explode into bloodshed. Still, he clung to the hope that these northerners might yet be convinced. He found Tormund standing watch near the largest cluster of wildlings, the shape of him outlined by the firelight. The big man was restless, pacing a short track back and forth, the set of his jaw carved by an old frustration that Jon recognized. Tormund had never been one to stand idle. Jon approached him slowly, aware that speaking too loudly might rouse unwanted attention. "You'll wear your boots through the snow at this rate," Jon said quietly, trying for a hint of levity. Tormund snorted. "We're caged. You might as well put us in chains. Standing here while those riders glare at us from the trees. It's not my idea of a fine evening." Jon glanced past him toward the flickering lights where the Umber men guarded the perimeter. Some of them were resting, their horses huffing plumes of steam, but a few remained upright in the saddle. "It's safer than a full battle," Jon said. "Maybe in the morning the messenger they sent will return with news that we can parley." "You think it'll be that easy?" Tormund asked, voice low. "These kneelers don't look eager to welcome us. We're lucky they haven't tried to pick us off already." Jon nodded. The Umber riders had the advantage after all. If they wanted, they could melt into the forest and trouble the free folk with arrows at random. But so far, they'd kept the peace. That alone was a sign, albeit a small one. Jon had chosen to reveal his name and title, without hiding behind subterfuge, banking on the faint chance that it might stop them from attacking. Perhaps that gamble had worked. "Let's hold out hope," Jon replied. "Our people are weary. We need this." "Nay?" Tormund grunted, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "If we're to die, I'd rather it be in a glorious charge than pinned in a field. But I'll do as you say. Gods know we've followed your lid through worse." Jon gave him a half-smile and moved on. He felt restless himself. The hush of the camp, the knowledge that the Umbers were just yards away, set his nerves on edge. He made his rounds, stopping by small clumps of wildlings gathered around shielded fires. A spearwife with a scar across her cheek was murmuring a lullaby to a child who clung to her side. A group of older men quietly shared a jug of something strong that smelled of fermented pine sap. Day. They spared Jon polite nods but little conversation. The tension was too thick for idle chatter. He saw Morna Stoneeye seated on a stump near the middle of the camp, her single good eye following him as he passed. She said nothing, but the tilt of her head felt like a question. What happens now? He wished he had an answer that went beyond wait and see. The hours stretched. A numbness crept into Jon's limbs, and he walked to stay warm, feeling the strain on everyone around him. Now and again, he caught a glimpse of Ghost prowling between tents, the direwolf's pale fur ghost-like in the dark. Even Ghost seemed unsettled, sniffing the air and baring his teeth whenever the Umber horses moved too close to the outer ring of the camp. Though exhaustion tugged at him, Jon did not sleep. Instead, he found a quiet spot near a dying fire and sank to one knee, letting the heat brush his face while his mind churned with possibilities. A direct assault was madness. They were outnumbered by the North's combined houses, and they had no siege weapons, no organized cavalry, no reinforcements waiting in the wings. If the Umbers decided to coordinate with other lords, the free folk would be trapped. There was nowhere to run except back to the frozen wastes beyond the wall, which would be certain death for many. He remembered the old ways, how Mance Rayder had tried to unite the free folk to flee the White Walkers, how they'd hammered at the wall in a desperate attempt to cross. That was a battle against doom itself. Now he faced a different challenge, to convince the people of the North that these free folk, once their sworn enemies, could coexist. But the North had just emerged from other wars that shattered families, houses, and allegiances. It might be too soon to ask for more generosity. Still, he had no choice but to try. As the sky paled with the first hint of dawn, Jon rose from his vigil. A thin crust of ice clung to his cloak, crackling when he moved. He scanned the horizon, but the land was still and quiet. The Umber riders remained in place, torches reduced to faint embers. More of them were awake now, stirring in the saddle or preparing for their morning routines. Jon turned to Tormund, who was yawning noisily and stamping his feet. "We'll see if they approach us," Jon said. "If not, I'll go speak with them." "We'll see how that goes," Tormund rumbled. Jon took a moment to ensure everyone was in position, cautioning the warriors to keep calm if the Umbers drew near. The free folk were unaccustomed to waiting on the courtesy of any lord. Wildlings might demand things, take them by force if they had to, but negotiation was not a skill many had honed. Jon insisted they must at least try, so they waited. The morning light gradually revealed the stark outlines of the forest, the shape of each branch edged in pale frost. No messenger arrived. A tension brewed in Jon's chest. He could almost taste the impatience simmering among the wildlings. Finally, unable to bear the stalemate any longer, Jon mounted a shaggy Garin, one of the sturdy northern horses that the free folk used for travel. He steadied the animal beneath him and urged it forward. heading for the line of Umber riders. "Careful," Tormund muttered, gripping the haft of his axe. Jon looked back and nodded once. Then he guided the Garen across the thinning snow, past watchful eyes. The Umber riders tensed when they saw him approach, some lifting bows, others setting their hands to sword. Jon raised both arms, palms open. One man, older and more scarred than the rest, trotted forward a few paces on his tall mare. His beard was shot with gray, and his eyes gleamed with suspicion. "What do you want, Snow?" he called, words clouding in the cold. "We told you to wait for our messenger to return." Jon halted a safe distance away. "I come in peace," he answered. The same line as before. "You've had time to see we're not attacking. I was wondering if you had word from your lord. We can't remain like this forever." The man's stare was cold. He looked over Jon's shoulder at the mass of wildlings behind him. "No ravens come back. Might be a day or more. Until then, you'll keep your place." Jon whined in his frustration, speaking calmly. "My people are short on food and time. We need a real chance to negotiate, or we move on. And if we move on without your permission, you'll be cut down." The Umber rider finished with a sneer. "A direct order. You try to pass through our lands, you die. We've men enough in the forest to pepper your folk with arrows before you take 3 steps." Jon nodded slowly, though his heart sank. He had hoped for more flexibility. "Could I send one of our own with you? Let them speak directly to your new lord, so he can understand our cause." The older rider barked a humorless laugh. "You think we'll just let a wildling into Last Hearth? Or Winterfell, for that matter?" "I'm no fool," Jon said evenly. "I'd go myself if I had the chance, but something tells me that won't be acceptable to you either." The rider's horse stamped the ground, breath billowing. The man paused, as if weighing some private thought. "I'll speak with my men," he said at last. "But I make no guarantees. We're loyal to the North, and the North has no love for your kind, nor for deserters of the Night's Watch." "Deserters of the Watch," Jon repeated softly, recalling how that once would have been a death sentence. He exhaled, the memory of his murder at the hands of his brothers briefly flaring in the back of his mind, an ache that still felt fresh in the quiet hours of the night. "I understand your position truly, but consider that we have more children than warriors here. If it comes to bloodshed, we'll all pay the price." The rider's lips tightened, but he said nothing more. Instead, he wheeled his horse around and trotted back to his companions, who formed a tight knot of conversation. Jon lingered for a moment, then turned back to his people. When he arrived at the free folk lines, Tormund raised a questioning eyebrow. "Well?" Tormund asked. Jon dismounted. "They're waiting on a raven. Might be a day, might be more. If we try to move, they'll attack." Morna, who had appeared at Tormund's side, scowled. "We can't just stand here. We've got little to eat and less firewood. Are we to freeze and starve while they watch?" Jon ran a hand over his face, feeling the weariness clinging to every muscle. "We'll gather what we can from the surrounding forest. Carefully. Their archers may see it as provocation if we send out large hunting parties. I'll speak with them again, see if they'll let us gather wood." "Oraktes." He turned back, approaching the riders a second time. This time, the men parted, and the older rider led him near. In a few curt words, Jon explained that his people needed to forage, nothing more. The man looked skeptical, but eventually gave a terse nod. "Wood's worthless in a fight," he said, "so gather it, but no more than 100 steps from your camp, and you hunt no game without permission." Jon acknowledged the terms. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to keep the wildlings from muttering rebellion. He returned and organized small groups, each with only a few members, to collect fallen branches and deadwood. The watchers from House Umber stood by with arrows nocked, ready to loose if the free folk strayed too far, or seemed to pose a threat. A grim game of caution. Despite the cold, sweat beaded at Jon's brow. All it would take was one over-eager group trying to snare a hare or a deer, and an arrow could spark a slaughter. By midday, the free folk had managed to bolster their small fires. Some peeled bark from trees in search of edible scraps. Others huddled together, sharing what little they had left of the salted fish. Children whimpered, hungry and chilled, and that sound tore at Jon's heart, more than any threat from the Umbers could. He walked among them, offering small words of reassurance and racking his mind for solutions. They couldn't last more than a few days like this. They needed to move, to find shelter or farmland or something more sustainable. The day passed in slow, suffocating tension. Now and then, Jon spotted the older Umber rider consulting with a few men who looked like scouts. Then they'd disappear into the trees. By late afternoon, they'd returned with little more to say. No raven had arrived. Some of the free folk began to question Jon's leadership. A few whispered about simply charging the line of riders, scattering them, and making a break for it. Tormund and Morna did their best to keep those voices calm, reminding them that the rest of the North was likely roused by now, and that the Umbers were only a fraction of what awaited them if they broke the truce. As dusk settled, a bitter wind swept through the camp, snuffing out a handful of fires. Jon stood at the crest of a gentle rise, looking out over the huddled shapes. He felt the weight of responsibility press down. He'd led these people with the promise of something better, but so far all he could offer them was risk, hunger, and the threat of war. The memory of Ygritte's voice, that soft accent dancing across words of love, teased him in the back of his mind. She had once believed in a dream of freedom, in living beyond the wall without fear. Now he was trying to bring that dream to fruition, and the dream felt so far away. Night draped them again, the second night spent under watchful guard. For a time, Jon slept in uneasy fits, haunted by images of ghostly figures in the trees. Sometime in the early hours, he jolted awake to Ghost's low growl. He rose, heart pounding. All around, people stirred, as if the hush carried an electric charge. Then he heard it, distant hooves. Quite a few. Coming from the south. He grabbed his sword, eyes scanning the darkness. At the perimeter, the Umber riders shifted in their saddles, tension radiating from them. Jon half expected to see an Umber patrol returning, but these were different. They carried torches lit in fresh flame, bright in the gloom. Slowly, with methodical speed, a column of horsemen emerged from a gap in the trees. Their banners were hard to make out at first, but as the torches flickered, Jon glimpsed the faint outline of a flayed man. His heart twisted in his chest. The Bolton sigil. Yet the Boltons were no more, or so the rumors said. Could it be some remnant loyalists, or a house that took up their banner for intimidation? He looked around frantically. Tormund was at his side, axe in hand, while Morna and others readied spears. The free folk whispered angrily, the name Bolton stirring old horrors of flayed men and cruelty beyond measure. The older Umber rider cursed under his breath, spurring his horse forward. His men formed a line, torches held high. The new riders, a dozen or so with more behind them, came to a halt just outside bow range. A tall, slim figure dismounted and stepped forward, accompanied by a standard bearer who held the flayed man banner. Jon strained to see who it was, but the shadows kept the man's features hidden. The older Umber rider shouted into the night, "Who comes here under that vile sigil? State your name and your purpose." A pause stretched. Then the tall figure answered, voice edged in ice, "We are the Red Kings of the Dreadfort, or what remains. We ride under no illusions of the old ways, but we claim this territory for the rightful warden of the North. Stand aside." "B'ni." The older rider let out a bark of anger. "The rightful warden is chosen by the great houses. The Boltons are dead. Are you an upstart sworn to some distant cousin?" The tall figure did not move closer. "I come at the behest of the new warden. The realms have changed since the wars. By whose authority do you bar the road? There's a wildling army here if you can't see." The Umber rider snapped. "We hold them until we get word from Last Hearth." "Last Hearth no longer commands these lands," the figure replied. "That distinction belongs to our lord." Jon watched from within the wildling ranks, dread creeping up his spine. A new warden of the North? Had the Crown in King's Landing named some Boltonkin, or was this an impostor forging alliances by fear? He recalled too well what the Boltons had done to Winterfell and the Stark family. It sickened him to think that their symbol might be carried again under any pretense of legitimacy. The tall figure swung back into the saddle and let the banner-bearer come forward. In the torchlight, Jon caught sight of the face beneath the hood, a man with sunken cheeks and pale eyes, a cruel twist to his mouth. He scanned the assembled Umbers, then turned his gaze to the free folk in the distance. "We have no quarrel with you Umbers," he said, "but if you do not yield, it becomes our quarrel." The older Umber rider stiffened. "We've got orders from our chieftain to hold them," he growled, jabbing a thumb at the Wildlings. "No one gave me orders to bow to the flayed man." The new riders shifted. Several drew swords halfway from their scabbards. "Then you stand in the way of the new warden's will," the hooded man said quietly. "He knows of the Wildlings' presence and has commanded us to secure them, by any means necessary." Jon felt his blood go cold. So the new warden knew. Darn well. Possibly House Umber had sent their raven, or other scouts had carried word. But the arrival of men bearing the Bolton banner changed everything. The Umbers might hold some shredded respect for the old ties to House Stark, or the memory of Ned Stark's wards. But these men? They exuded an aura of violence. An uneasy hush settled over the entire clearing as the two sides glared at each other. A low hiss of steel broke that hush. The first sword was fully drawn, and as if guided by a single pulse, more swords followed, sliding from scabbards in quick, scraping arcs. The older Umber rider raised his torch, eyes flashing. "You come with no rightful claim. I'll see no Bolton scum commanding these lands. Stay back, or I'll have your hide." The hooded man kicked his horse closer, letting the banner-bearer fall in behind. "Then you defy the new warden," he said, his voice smooth. "And the penalty is death." Jon cursed silently. He could almost see the lines being drawn. The free folk stood behind the Umbers, uncertain whether this new force would be friend or foe. The Umbers themselves, it seemed, had more pride than to bow to a rumored Bolton pretender. Steel glimmered in torchlight. Horses snorted, stamping the ground. Even at a distance, Jon recognized that one foolish move on either side would spark a bloodbath, and the free folk would be caught in the middle. He glanced at Tormund. "We can't let them fight. If they do, it'll spill over to us." Tormund grimaced. "They're going to fight whether we like it or not. Looks like these Umbers want yield, and these newcomers aren't taking no for an answer." Jon's mind raced. If the Umbers engaged with these alleged Bolton riders, the free folk might slip away in the chaos. But that would solve nothing if more forces converged from other directions. Maybe it was better to try to keep the peace right here. He turned to Morna and some of the other spearwives. "Stay alert. If things turn ugly, protect our people. No rash attacks unless we have no choice." "Da." He urged his Garen forward again, ignoring Tormund's hissed protest. The horse resisted for a moment before trotting into the open, where both sides could see him. Torches flared, revealing his face, and he called out for calm in as steady a voice as he could manage. "Stand down, both of you," Jon shouted, his tone ringing in the stillness. "Slaughtering each other gains nothing. We can speak this through." Two men from the newly arrived force turned their horses to face him. One barked a short laugh. "Speak. With Wildlings. The warden wants them captured or killed. We have our orders. And who are you to defy them?" "Done." The older Umber rider seemed just as incensed. "We hold them until we hear from Last Hearth. That's the way of it. You would trespass and claim you outrank our chieftain?" Jon reached the midpoint between the two lines. His Garen tossed its head, spooked by the tension. "If a new warden commands, let him come in person," Jon demanded. "I'm Jon Snow. I was crowned king in the north once, with the blessing of many houses. If there truly is a new warden, let him treat with me before ordering a massacre." "Edimne." "Oh." The hooded man narrowed his eyes at the mention of Jon's name. He exchanged a glance with one of his companions. A flicker of recognition or confusion crossed his features. "King in the north? You disappeared. We heard rumors you'd gone beyond the wall like a coward." Jon refused to let the barb distract him. "I did, because there was a war greater than any you could imagine, against the dead. We fought them, we won, and the free folk bled by our side. They have earned the right to settle. Surely a warden of the north can see reason in that. Name? The man let out a dismissive snort. The new warden sees only what is best for his rule. These wildlings are a threat. The realm knows their raids, their butchery. We've come to put an end to it. He lifted a hand, and the riders behind him tensed, ready to surge forward. Before they could move, the Umber rider roared, "You'll not do so on our land. We do not accept your warden." Swords lifted higher, and the ring of steel on steel echoed as a few men tested each other's guard. John's heart pounded. They were seconds away from violence. He raised his voice. "Enough. If either of you draws blood, the other will retaliate. And who suffers in the end? All of us, including the innocent." A moment of stillness. Then the hooded man flicked his gaze at John. "We don't need your sermon. Step aside." John gritted his teeth. "You'll have to cut me down first." Across the darkness, he sensed Tormund tense, ready to charge if John was threatened. The free folk bristled at the possibility of losing their leader. The Umber riders hesitated, uncertain whether to let John stand as a shield or to strike anyway. The hooded man considered. John could see the shift in his posture, the slow roll of the shoulders that preceded a decision. Finally the man lowered his sword, if only partially. "This is bigger than one scuffle," he said, voice dripping with disdain. "The new warden wants these wildlings contained. If the Umbers refuse to comply, that's their mistake. But I'll not spill blood under the cloak of darkness in a forest. Let the Umbers chieftain come forward and declare his loyalty or face the consequences." The older Umber rider turned to his men. A brief, tense discussion ensued, hushed words passing between them. John couldn't make out every phrase, but he heard, "Upstart, Bolton scum," and "honor." After a moment the older rider shouted, "We'll send a rider for our chieftain. He'll decide how we handle you. But you'd best not overstep in the meantime." "Likewise," the hooded man countered. "We'll await your chieftain's verdict. But let it be clear. Any attempt to let these wildlings slip away will be met with force." The older rider spat on the ground. "Your threats are worth as much as your flayed man banner. Phil, hold your line if you must, but you don't command us." Nay. With that, a shaky truce formed, one that seemed even more precarious than what had come before. Now the free folk were pinned between two unfriendly forces. The Umbers who claimed old rights over their lands, and these new riders loyal to a warden who seemed to echo the Bolton cruelty of the past. John guided his horse back to the wildling line, feeling the press of eyes from both sides. "It seems we've made this clearing a magnet," Tormund said darkly when John returned. "First the Umbers, now these flayed man scum. Who's next?" "Nanny." John slid off his garron. The horse snorted, and he ran a hand along its mane. If the new warden truly wants the free folk contained, he'll send more forces. That or come himself. Either way, we're in trouble if we can't negotiate. Morna joined them, her spear tip gleaming in the torchlight. "We're just going to wait for them to decide our fate. That's no kind of life. We'll all freeze out here." She gestured at the huddled families behind her. "I know," John said. "But we can't charge blindly, or we'll be cut down by crossfire. We might have to keep waiting until the Umber chieftain or the warden arrives. In the meantime, we strengthen our camp, gather wood and what food we can. We keep guard, we stay united. If a fight comes, we'll fight, but not before." "Neother world." Tormund frowned. "That's no guarantee we'll survive. We're surrounded by enemies now, not just one lot but two." John nodded. "Still, I'd rather have them at odds with each other than allied together. Maybe we can exploit that, if it comes to war." The words tasted bitter. He had hoped to avoid war altogether, but the day had brought them no closer to peace. He felt half blind, trying to chart a course through thick fog, where every step could plunge them off a cliff. The night deepened, and both groups of northern riders maintained their lines, setting up their own small camps. Fires glowed in two distinct rings, one to the northeast, one to the southeast, and the wildlings in the middle. In a grim sense, it formed a triad of tension, each side suspicious of the other. John stationed watchers on all flanks, instructing them to signal at the first sign of movement. He doubted the Umbers or the Bolton loyalists would attempt an assault immediately, but it never hurt to be prepared. The hours crawled. A faint snowfall began, thin flakes that drifted in the torchlight and melted on the ground, leaving it a patchy, muddy white. Despite the cold, an air of restlessness kept the free folk awake and stirring. Some whispered that this was a sign the old gods had abandoned them, that forging south had been a doomed plan from the start. Jon tried to assuage their fears, walking among them, reminding them that the alternative was starving beyond the wall, but he had fewer comforting words left to offer. Every new obstacle felt like another bond of chain dragging them down. At some point in the dead of night, he came across a small group of wildlings wrapped in tattered furs, quietly singing in their language. The melody was haunting, echoing off the silent trees, telling an ancient story of a time when giants roamed freely and men respected their dominion over the cold, hard land. He lingered by the edge of their circle, letting the music seep into his bones. Despite everything, hope clung to them in the form of song. It was a fragile but beautiful thing in the face of fear. Jon found his thoughts drifting again to Winterfell, to what might be happening there. Had Sansa, Arya, or Bran returned? Did any of them hold a seat of power that could shift the tide in his favor? He was uncertain how the realm had reorganized itself after the wars. Had heard rumors of new lords, new alliances, but details were scarce beyond the wall. If only there were a way to send a raven of his own, to call upon someone who might broker peace. But the risk of letting the Umbers or these Bolton loyalists see a wildling messenger would be high. It might provoke an immediate attack. As the night wore on, the friction between the riders from both camps only increased. Jon noticed the Umbers occasionally lobbing insults across the narrow gap, and the Bolton riders responding in kind. No open violence, but the tension simmered. He could almost feel the resentment swirling like storm clouds. A single spark could unleash a tempest of swords and arrows. He stayed on his feet until the first blush of dawn spread across the horizon. The sky lightened to a watery gray, the snow having stopped during the darkest hours. The free folk emerged from their tents or lean toes, shoulders hunched, breath steaming in the cold air. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes, and mothers tried to coax them to eat scraps of whatever remained. Jon was conferring with Tormund and Morna when he spotted movement in the trees to the west. Several riders approached, escorted by a handful of armed men. These newcomers rode beneath the Umber sigil, the roaring giant. As they drew closer, the older Umber rider who'd been holding the perimeter barked an order to let them pass. The group rode right up to the existing Umber lines, where a brief, agitated conversation ensued. Then one of the new arrivals, a tall, raw-boned man with hair so blonde it appeared almost white, dismounted. He wore heavy furs, a simple sword belted at his hip, and the expression on his face was grim as a frozen tomb. Jon observed from a distance, trying to gauge the man's bearing. He had the look of someone in command. The other Umbers bowed their heads respectfully, stepping aside to let him pass. The man walked toward the clearing between the two camps, torchlight revealing pale blue eyes set in a hard face. The Bolton riders stirred, their leader stepping forward as well. It seemed an audience was about to occur whether Jon liked it or not. The blond man called out, voice carrying across the frosty air. "I am Harrion Umber, chieftain of the Last Hearth in my father's stead. Who dares ride under the flayed man banner in my domain?" "Imho." The hooded man who led the Bolton riders advanced a few steps, letting his torch illuminate the twisted emblem on his standard. "I speak for the new warden of the North whose seat is soon to be declared. You hold no rightful domain if you defy him." Harrion Umber narrowed his eyes, anger clear on his features. "We bow to no flayed man. If the warden is truly recognized by the realm, let him come to me in peace. Otherwise you're trespassing under a banner that died with Ramsay Bolton." Nemtim Dewan. At the mention of Ramsay's name, Jon felt a ripple of old terror flit through him. So many had suffered under that monster. The hooded man stood silent for a moment, then said, "We carry out the orders of the new warden. We have no interest in your fealty, Umber. Only in containing the threat that stands behind you." He nodded at the wildling encampment. "Move aside or stand in our way." Harrion let out a disgusted sound. These lands belong to my house. I'll not see them bloodied by the likes of you." His eyes flickered to Jon Snow. "And as for the Wildlings, that's a matter I'll deal with myself, once I've learned more. If you have an issue, you can take it up with me in my hall." Jon stepped forward, deciding now was the time to intervene. "Lord Umber," he said, emphasizing the title. "These men claim the Warden's authority. But we've only their word for that. I ask for a chance to speak with you, about the free folk, and about what we truly want." Harrion's gaze swept across Jon, eyebrows lifting. "You're the one they called the bastard of Ned Stark, are you not? The one who was once named king in the north?" Jon inclined his head. "That's me. And if you remember anything of House Stark's tradition, it's that we keep our word. I swear to you, my people only seek a home. If you'll grant me an audience, I can explain everything." An uneasy pause. The Bolton rider shifted, clearly unhappy at the direction of the conversation. Harry Umber studied Jon with an expression that hovered between suspicion and grudging respect. Then he said, "Very well, but I'll not do it here with that filth eavesdropping." He jerked a thumb at the hooded man. "If you can find a way past their line, I'll hear you in my hall." At once the hooded man snarled. "He goes nowhere. The free folk remain under watch until the Warden arrives. If you harbor them, you'll be complicit in their crimes." Harrion's jaw tightened. "You speak as though you're the law of the North. Last I checked, the king's seat is far to the south, and the Lannisters have little say here now. We've always governed ourselves." "Now, Caracal." The hooded man's gloved hand flexed near the pommel of his sword. "Those days are over. The Warden has the king's support, and if you spurn him, you spurn the crown. That is treason, Lord Umber." A ripple of tension traveled through the Umber riders. Jon saw them bristle at the threat, but Harrion let out a cold laugh, nearly a snarl. "Treason, is it? I've heard that word tossed around by power-hungry fools before." He pointed at Jon. "I hear him out, whether you permit it or not." Then to Jon he said, "If you wish to speak, come to Last Hearth under a flag of truce. I can guarantee your safety, but I can't guarantee the safety of all your people until I know what the hell you want." Jon glanced at the hooded man. The hostility in those pale eyes had sharpened, but he remained silent, as if trying to decide whether to clash openly with the Umbers now or bide his time. "I'll come," Jon said firmly, "but I need assurances that the free folk left here won't be attacked in my absence." Harrion shrugged. "I can't speak for these riders who claim the Warden's name, but my men won't break this standoff while you're gone." He cast a withering look at the hooded figure. "If they try to cross us, we'll see how well their threats hold up." Jon's chest tightened. The thought of leaving thousands of wildlings unprotected in a field, surrounded by two potential enemies, made his stomach churn. But if he didn't go, negotiations might never happen. "I'll need a small escort," he said, "at least to prevent any convenient accidents on the road." A faint smile touched Harrion's face, though it did little to warm his expression. "Bring whomever you trust most, within reason. We ride back to Last Hearth immediately. If we leave now, we'll reach it by nightfall, assuming those flayed man fools don't bar the road." The hooded man spat. "You test our patience. But for now, ride if you must. The Warden will hear of your insolence, and I promise you, Umber, he won't forget." Harrion waved a dismissive hand and returned to his horse. Jon turned to Tormund, Morna, and a handful of others who had crept forward to listen. He spoke in a low voice. "I don't like leaving the rest of you here, but I have to take this chance. Without the Umbers, we have no hope of parley in the north." Tormund's eyes flicked to the men bearing the Bolton banner. "And if they attack while you're gone?" Jon pressed his lips together, a flurry of doubt haunting him. "We'll leave enough strong fighters to defend the perimeter. The Umbers won't allow them to pass easily. That gives us some protection. In the meantime, I'll do all I can to secure an arrangement with Harrion." Morna nodded, though her expression was troubled. "Fine. But don't tarry. Our supplies run thin, and the weather won't improve soon." Jon looked around, scanning faces, settling on Tormund first. "I want you here, Tormund. The free folk trust you. You can keep morale steady better than I can while I'm gone." Tormund grunted. Not pleased, but understanding the logic. "You're sure you don't want me as your right arm? In case the Umbers decide to trap you." "Mender, I'd rather risk myself than leave the people in chaos," Jon said. "You'll guard them, keep them safe. Morna will help. I'll take a small escort, maybe 6 men and women I trust, and ride with Lord Umber. If I'm not back in a few days, assume I failed." Tormund's big hand clapped Jon's shoulder hard enough to ache. "Don't fail, Crow. We've come too far for that." Jon managed a tight smile. "I'll do my best." Then he turned to gather his chosen companions. A mix of spearwives, a scout who knew the terrain somewhat, and a pair of warriors who had followed him since his time with Mance Rayder. They armed themselves lightly, enough to show they weren't helpless, but not so heavily as to seem threatening. In short order, Harry Umber and his men prepared to depart. The day had only just begun, but the sky was already heavy with the promise of more snow. Jon walked through the ranks of wildlings, offering a few words of reassurance. He stooped to place a hand on a child's shoulder, meeting frightened eyes and saying, as gently as he could, "We're going to find a way through this." Whether it was true or not, he had to keep hope alive. At last, he and his small escort mounted their horses. Tormund stood back, axe resting across his shoulder. Morna and the others formed a defensive circle around the free folk, glaring at the Bolton riders who lounged on their horses, waiting like wolves for an opening. Harrion gave a short whistle, and the Umber party set off at a brisk trot, heading west, and then curving north, presumably to circle back to the main road leading toward Last Hearth. Jon cast a final glance over his shoulder at the wide swath of makeshift tents and fires behind him, at Tormund's solitary figure diminishing in the distance. "Hold on, old friend," he murmured to himself. "We'll make this right." The ride began, the cold wind biting at Jon's face as they moved into the forest's edge. The trees creaked overhead, showering them with loose snow. Harrion led, face set, speaking little. His men rode in pairs, vigilant, occasionally glancing behind them in case the Bolton riders made a move. Jon and his companions remained close, following the narrow trail between the pines. At times, the wind died down, and the air was eerily silent, broken only by the horses' hooves crunching through ice and snow. After about an hour, Harrion signaled a halt near a frozen stream. He dismounted, letting his horse drink where the ice had been broken by the hooves of other travelers. He turned to Jon. "I know your name, Snow, and I know something of your deeds. My father once spoke well of Eddard Stark, but that doesn't mean I trust you." "Bah." Jon stood, adjusting his cloak. "I don't expect trust without proof." "But your father fought in the War of the Five Kings, did he not? He saw how the realm can tear itself apart." Harrion's jaw tensed. "He died in that war. Or rather, bled out after the Red Wedding. I took over as soon as I was old enough, but the North has seen nothing but turmoil since. We had Ramsay Bolton for a time. Then you, then the Targaryen queen from across the sea. Then more changes I can barely keep track of. My people are tired of kneeling to whoever conquers, so we keep to ourselves. That's a war." Jon nodded. "I don't blame you, and I'm sorry about your father. But understand, I have no interest in ruling the North again. I only want the free folk to have a place where they won't starve or freeze. We can make common cause. The Bolton loyalists threaten you as much as they threaten us." A flicker of agreement passed across Harrion's face. Then he said, "If I grant you an audience at Last Hearth, you'll see how lean our larders are. We've not recovered from the wars, and the harvest was poor. How do I feed an army of wildlings? The rest of the North might condemn me as a traitor just for harboring." "We're not asking for charity," Jon countered. "If we can find land where they can settle, somewhere that isn't heavily populated, then they can hunt, farm, do as they must. We only ask you not to stand in our way." Harrion's pale eyes narrowed. "That's still a big ask, Snow. The North is large, but so are your numbers. People fear what they don't understand, and we understand wildlings to be savage and lawless." "Nod, Godjay." Jon sighed, remembering how many times he'd heard the same refrain. They have their own code, their own way. You'll find them no more savage than any warlord who's marched under a southern banner. If we can talk to the other houses, Harrion snorted. And which houses would that be? The Karstarks are in disarray. The Manderleys keep to White Harbor. The Glovers, gods know what they're doing. Many houses still nurse grudges from the last war. We're a mess, Snow. I'd rather not add another spark to the tinder. Jon exhaled. I understand. But the alternative is letting the Bolton loyalists gather power, claim the wardenship, and possibly reignite a reign of terror. And what if they come for you next, whether you yield or not? They'll never trust you once they hear you've given me an audience. A bitter smile curved Harrion's lips. So you're telling me I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't? Perhaps. But at least if we work together, we can stand a chance of forging some peace. We might stop the Bolton resurgence before it spreads. Harrion studied Jon for a few heartbeats, then nodded curtly. Fine. We ride for Last Hearth. I'll decide once we're safe behind my walls, whether to support you or turn you away. In the meantime, keep that sword sheathed. My people will not take kindly to any threat within our hall. Jon placed a hand lightly on Longclaw's hilt. I have no intention of drawing steel unless forced. Harrion's men finished watering their horses, and they mounted up once more, continuing the journey. Snow began to fall again, heavier this time, swirling in gusts around them. The trail narrowed, winding through thick stands of pine. Jon's escort stayed close, eyes darting through the undergrowth in case of ambush. But they saw nothing except the occasional hare darting away, and the hush of the forest enveloped them. As midday turned to afternoon, the trees opened up to reveal rolling hills, each dusted with powdery snow. In the distance, Jon spotted a line of rugged foothills, and beyond that, a looming silhouette of stone perched on a ridge, Last Hearth. It was a formidable fortress, though smaller than Winterfell, built with thick walls of gray stone that seemed carved from the bones of the land. Smoke rose from within its keeps and towers. The sight stirred memories of the few times Jon had visited with his father, years ago, back when the Umbers were loyal bannermen to House Stark. They approached cautiously, Harrion signaling to a watchman perched atop the outer gatehouse. A horn blew, echoing across the frosty plain. The gates groaned open, admitting the riders into a courtyard half buried in snow. Stableboys rushed to take the horses, eyeing Jon's party with as much curiosity as trepidation. Guards in patched cloaks stood around, leaning on halberds that had seen better days. It was clear that the Umbers were struggling. The signs of meager resources were everywhere, from the tired-looking livestock to the battered equipment. Harrion dismounted and gestured for Jon and his companions to follow him. They passed under a stone archway into the main keep. Torches lit the interior corridors with flickering light. The air inside was marginally warmer, though it still carried a chill that seeped through the walls. Servants peeked from behind corners, startled to see unfamiliar faces. Harrion led them into a modest hall lined with wooden beams and a fireplace at one end. A large table stood in the center, and a rack of antlers hung above the mantel. Jon noted how the table's corners were chipped and dented, the benches around it worn from years of use. Harrion took the seat at the head, resting his elbows on the rough surface. His men stayed on their feet, posted at intervals around the room. Jon and his chosen escort stood near the opposite end of the table, uncertain of the protocol. Finally, Harrion spoke. "Snow, you and your people can sit. You've come a long way. For good or ill, we might as well discuss matters like civilized folk." Jon inclined his head in thanks. He and his handful of wildlings sat, though they looked uneasy on the benches. One of them, a spearwife named Wyn, kept darting her gaze at the guards behind them, as if expecting an attack at any moment. Harrion studied them in the firelight. Then he turned to one of his retainers, a stooped man with thinning hair who wore a simple chain around his neck. Perhaps a steward or advisor. "Bring what ale and bread we have," Harrion said, adding a rueful note. "We'll offer what little hospitality we can manage." The steward bobbed his head and left. Harrion's eyes snapped back to Jon. "Let's skip the pleasantries. Tell me your plan. If I allow these free folk to cross my lands, what do I gain?" Jon clasped his hands together. "My gratitude, for one. But more importantly, if they settle, They can protect the northern borders from any threat that might come from beyond the wall. They fought the dead. They're hardened by winter. And you might find new trade routes open if the free folk integrate peacefully. Harrion gave a short laugh. Peaceful integration. That's a lofty dream. He drummed his fingers on the tabletop. The north is vast, but where would they go? Most of the good farmland is already claimed. The mountainous areas offer little but stone and iron. Jon considered, recalling the glimpses of maps he'd studied. There are stretches of forested land near the far northeast, mostly uninhabited except for scattered villages. It's harsh terrain, but the free folk know how to survive in harsh conditions. If you allowed them to settle, perhaps near abandoned holdfasts, they could at least build a foothold. They wouldn't be in direct competition with your own farmers and would have a natural barrier against whoever calls himself warden. And you believe they'll just remain there quietly? Harrion asked, skepticism dripping from his words. They have no desire to raid if they're given a chance to live without threat. Jon replied. Generations of conflict taught the free folk that the southern kingdoms would never accept them. I'm trying to prove otherwise. Harrion folded his arms. Before he could respond, the steward returned with a tray of hard bread, thin soup, and a pitcher of ale. One by one he served the guests, each portion modest. Harrion tore a piece of bread with his teeth. You see how we fare, he said after swallowing. Would we truly have enough to spare for thousands of wildlings? That's my concern. They can take care of themselves, Jon said. Hunt, gather, build. They won't leech off your stores. They just need the space and the chance. Harrion made a non-committal sound. His gaze flicked to Wyn and the others at the table. What say you? He asked them. Are you so eager to be part of the North that you'll obey its customs, its laws? Wyn set her jaw. We free folk. We follow no kings or lords. But Jon Snow says you might leave us be if we keep to ourselves. That's all we want. No raids, no wars. Harrion snorted. No wars, she says. As if we can wave a hand and banish it. War might come for us all, whether we want it or not. He rose abruptly from his seat, pacing toward the fire. I need time to think on this. In the meantime, you'll remain here as my guests. Comfortable enough, I hope, but under guard. I can't risk you sneaking back to your people without my permission. Jon dipped his head in grudging acceptance. I understand. But please, understand that every day we linger, my people suffer. We need an answer soon. Dawan. Harrion ran a hand through his pale hair, looking as though he carried the weight of the entire fortress on his shoulders. I know, believe me, I'd like to see a day where the North can heal and stand strong again, but we must tread carefully. If that bastard who claims the Bolton banner truly has the king's support, we could face an invasion if we openly harbor wildlings. I won't lead my house to ruin. Jon nodded, rising as well. If it comes to a fight with the Boltons, we'd stand with you. My people have no love for flayed men. Harrion's lips thinned. We'll speak again soon. For now, my steward will show you to chambers where you can rest. He waved a hand, and the stooped man stepped forward, bowing. The atmosphere crackled with uncertainty, but at least Jon had gained an audience and some measure of safety, under watchful eyes. Jon followed the steward out of the hall, Wyn and the others in tow. Guards flanked them down a corridor lit by small, guttering torches, the stale smell of old rushes filling the air. The steward opened a heavy wooden door to a small set of rooms, stone walls, a pair of narrow beds, a single brazier for heat. You'll stay here, the steward said quietly. I'll have blankets brought. Don't try to leave without an escort, or the guards will stop you. Jon muttered his thanks. Once the steward left, the guards shut the door behind them, the clang of iron bolts sliding into place echoing in the space. Wyn and the others exchanged uncertain looks. Jon exhaled, brushing melting snow from his cloak. We'll rest, then see how Harrion responds. With luck, we can come to an agreement that spares our people. Wyn folded her arms. And if not, then we'll have to find another way, Jon said softly, the flicker of the brazier lighting the worry in his dark eyes. But we're not beaten yet. He held onto that small ember of resolve, even though part of him feared what was happening back in the clearing. Were Tormund and the others still surrounded by two hostile forces? Would the Bolton loyalists make a move while Jon was gone? The uncertainties loomed, but he forced himself to focus on the present. This might be their best chance at forging a path into the north without bloodshed. He pulled off his gloves and sat on one of the narrow beds, leaning forward with elbows on knees. His breath puffed in the chilled air, and he noticed how the old stones of the room bore cracks from years of winter. Last Hearth, proud and stubborn, carrying the memory of Ned Stark's loyal bannermen. Was it truly the key to this new future? Perhaps Harry and Umber would find the will to stand against the Bolton pretender. Perhaps they could gather other northern houses to see reason. Jon cast a glance at the door, hearing the faint murmur of guards. For now, all he could do was wait. Pray that Tormund kept the peace in the clearing, and pray that Harry and Umber would choose the path of unity over fear. The day stretched on, shadows shifting across the cold stone floor. Outside, the wind battered the castle walls, moaning through narrow window slits. Jon wondered if the free folk felt that same wind in the open fields, forced to huddle against frost and the threat of ambush. He tried to rest, but his mind refused to settle. Instead, he closed his eyes and thought of Ghost, thought of the old gods, and thought of the vow he once took to guard the realms of men. Now he was trying to guard them all, including the free folk. Whether that vow was enough to sway a weary north, only time would tell. YK. Jon gazed into the small brazier's flames, watching how they licked at the bits of charcoal and scraps of kindling until they glowed red and orange. The warmth was meager at best, almost more of a promise than a reality in that drafty chamber. His companions, Wyn, Body, and 4 others, sat on rough stools, or on the edge of the narrow beds, each wearing the same anxious expression. From beyond the chamber door came the clank of boots on stone and the low drone of distant conversation. He guessed at least 2 guards stood outside, possibly more. Harry and Umber was taking no chances with his new guests. Time felt as though it moved in fits and starts. Sometimes the minutes seemed to race by when Jon's thoughts turned to the free folk out in the field, trapped between House Umber's wary swords and the Bolton loyalists' cold malice. Then, the minutes stretched like tar, each second weighed down by uncertainty. He caught himself wishing for something, anything, to disrupt the oppressive stillness of the keep. Yet at the same time, he dreaded whatever might come next. A messenger with news of a slaughter? Or Harry and Stuart bearing a missive from the so-called new Warden of the North, demanding Jon's head? The possibilities set his nerves on edge. Wyn began to pace, her spear propped against the wall. She was a lean woman in her mid-20s, hair cropped close to her skull so it wouldn't snag in branches during a hunt. Her dark eyes settled on Jon every few steps. "We're caged," she muttered, "like ravens in a rookery. I've never been a prisoner before. Is this how they treat all their guests? They call it hospitality," Jon said softly, trying to keep his tone calm. "It's more courtesy than we'd get from the Bolton riders. At least we're not in a dungeon." Body, a stocky man with a thick beard and a missing ear, grunted. "Feels enough like a dungeon to me. No windows, no real warmth, and we're no closer to an agreement than we were yesterday." Jon nodded, pressing his palms together. He was thinking of ways to push Harry in, to remind him that time was critical, but they'd done all they could for the moment. Harsh demands would only make Harry lock down further. Still, inactivity gnawed at him. He felt each moment weigh heavier on his conscience, knowing Tormund was out there with thousands of free folk, all looking to Jon to fulfill his promises. In the corridor, the murmur of voices grew momentarily louder. Heavy footsteps neared the door, and something, maybe a quickening in Jon's pulse, told him this time it wasn't just guards changing watch. He stood as the bolt scraped free of its iron clasp, and the door swung open. The stooped steward from before stepped inside, flanked by 2 Umber guards with halberds. "The Lord Harrion requests your presence," the steward announced, voice echoing in the sparse room. "Come, all of you, quickly." Jon exchanged a glance with Wyn, then slid Longclaw into the scabbard at his side. One of the guards gave a low growl. "You won't need a sword to talk," John kept his hand away from the hilt. "I'm not leaving it behind." His tone held a quiet finality. After a heartbeat's hesitation, the guard shrugged. The steward, eyes wary, turned and gestured for them to follow. They filed into the corridor, the stone walls lit by guttering torches. A chill draft whisked past their ankles. Wynne walked just behind John, spear in hand but point angled at the floor. The others trailed close, silent except for the shuffle of boots and the occasional nervous cough. Guards ahead and behind escorted them through a maze of passageways that twisted through the old keep. They climbed a winding staircase to a wide landing that opened onto a larger corridor lined with wooden doors and threadbare tapestries. The steward led them into a broad hall that John recognized from the day before. A row of windows along one wall let in weak daylight, enough to show the gray gloom of the winter sky. Thick beams crossed overhead, and at the far end a sizable hearth crackled with flames. Lord Umber stood by that fireplace, arms folded, his expression as wintry as the air outside. A cluster of his men filled the edges of the space, watchful. John counted at least 10. A precarious feeling coiled in his gut. Too many armed men in such a tight space. He had no illusions that he could prevail in a sudden fight. Lord beckoned them forward. "Jon Snow," he said, "I trust you've been comfortable enough." "We manage," Jon replied, stepping closer to the hearth's warmth. The flicker of firelight danced across Lord's pale features. "You asked to speak with us?" Lord nodded, his jaw tight. "I've had word from scouts and from certain correspondences. We'll discuss those soon. But first, I need to know who stands with you, and whether your claims about forging peace are honest." Jon felt a slight relief at the mention of correspondences. If Lord had indeed received ravens or messages, that might be the impetus needed to reach a decision. "I have told you the truth," Jon said. "The free folk only want to settle without threat. They'll leave you be if you let them be." Lord frowned. "Then explain why I'm hearing rumors that a separate band of wildlings was seen near Deepwood Motte. Are they part of your host or another group entirely?" Jon's heart sank. He hadn't heard of other wildlings crossing the wall, but it stood to reason that not all clans might have rallied under him. The scattered nature of the free folk meant some roamed independently. "I don't control every wildling beyond the wall," he said evenly. "Many see me as a leader, yes, but some might have chosen different routes, or these might be raiders who never agreed to come south peacefully." Lord's lips twisted. "So you admit there might be free folk who mean harm? That complicates my position. Snow, if they raid Deepwood Motte, I'll have the Glovers breathing down my neck, demanding I turn my swords on any other wildlings who venture into the north." "New." Jon understood the precariousness. One incident could poison the entire enterprise. "If you help me secure a safe settlement for the main host," Jon replied, "fewer wildlings will feel compelled to raid or wander. Once we have a recognized place for them, those smaller bands might come to us, or at least realize there's another way." Lord rubbed at his temples, frustration evident. "And that's assuming the other houses don't decide to raise banners against me for sheltering your people. Or that the Boltons, this new warden, if he truly exists, doesn't march on Last Hearth with a host of sellswords and southern allies." "Have you had direct word from him?" Jon asked. "This so-called new warden." Lord's gaze shifted to a narrow table nearby, where a scrap of parchment lay curled. "A raven arrived at dawn," he said. "One of my watchers brought it to me. It bears the seal of the king in King's Landing. A short message, but it confirms that someone has petitioned the crown to name a new warden of the north, one who pledges to quell the wildling incursion." He spat the last words as though they tasted of bile. "Doesn't name the warden specifically, but we can guess." Jon's jaw clenched. "So, the throne supports the Bolton loyalists?" "It seems so," Lord muttered. "Or at least, it doesn't outright deny them. The crown's in no position to question the minor details of the north, not after the last wars. They see only the reports, wildlings crossing the wall, houses in disarray. Likely they believe a strong and ruthless hand is needed to bring order." Jon's mind whirled. After everything that happened, The downfall of House Bolton, Sansa Stark retaking Winterfell, the Targaryen reign in the south. One would hope the memory of Bolton treachery would linger. Yet the crown might prefer any puppet who promised stability, rather than risk further rebellion. You know as well as I do what Boltons do to people, Jon said, voice low. If they hold power again, you'll see flayed men on every road. Harrion scowled. You think I want them rising again? My father served the Starks faithfully. We fought alongside Robb Stark before the Red Wedding. I'd sooner burn Last Hearth than bend the knee to a flayed man. His fingers drummed on the table, once, twice. But I must be practical. The Umbers are weakened from years of war and famine. Our walls aren't what they used to be, and we've lost men. If the Boltons march north with the king's blessing, however superficial that might be, I can't stand alone. Jon nodded, an idea sparking. You wouldn't stand alone. If you let the free folk settle and prepare, they could be your allies, your shield. Together, we might even rally other northern houses still loyal to the memory of the Starks. No. Harrion's gaze flicked across Jon's small group, Wyn, Body, and the others. He seemed to weigh Jon's words for a long moment. My men won't like the idea. They've spent their lives hearing horror stories of wildling raids. And the free folk won't like abiding by even the slightest of rules. Jon managed the ghost of a smile. I've spent enough time with them to know how stubborn they can be. But they follow me because I've proven I have their best interests at heart. They don't want war with your people, only safety. If you give them that, they'll defend you if it comes to it. Best of me. Harrion paced to the hearth, staring into the flames. A hush fell upon the hall, broken only by the crackle of wood and the muffled groan of wind outside. Jon felt his pulse pound, anticipating either acceptance or rejection in the next breath. Finally, Harrion turned around. I'll consider an alliance under certain conditions, he said. First, the free folk will not cross Umber territory unannounced. If they must move, we coordinate. Second, they don't approach any of our granaries, villages, or outposts without escort. Third, you, Snow, remain my liaison. If I have issues, I come to you. And you'd better resolve them. This is the only way I keep my men calm and my small folk from panicking. Never wait, Twiney. Jon exhaled, relief mixing with caution. That's more than fair. I'll do all I can to maintain order. But I need to get back to them soon. They're camped in the open, with hardly any supplies. Harrion's features tightened. We might arrange that. And if the Bolton loyalists strike first, I expect your people to defend our lands. If I see them run or turn their cloaks, I'll punish them as traitors. Is that clear? Da. Jon inclined his head. Yes, we're agreed. The tension in Harrion's stance eased, if only slightly. He scratched at the faint stubble on his jaw. Good. Then let's figure out how we get you back to your people without a fight. Those Bolton riders are still out there. Jon had been dreading that. If the Bolton loyalists, or whomever carried their banner, saw Harrion guiding Jon and his wildlings back, they might attack on sight. We'll need subterfuge, Jon said. A smaller party maybe. Or a messenger to distract them. Dempsey Kirondine. Harrion gestured for one of his men, a tall younger fellow with a scar across his nose, to step forward. This is Beren. He knows the forests around Last Hearth better than any living soul. I'll send him and a handful of trackers to guide you south by the old smugglers' paths. We can skirt around the clearing where your people are held. We'll have to slip past the Bolton watchers, but Beren can find ways to conceal your tracks. Jon felt a flare of hope. That might work. But once we reach the free folk, they'll still be pinned. The Umbers on one side, the Boltons on the other. Bah. Harrion nodded thoughtfully. I'll have my men withdraw from that clearing. Quietly, under the guise of reinforcing Last Hearth. We'll leave just enough to appear as if we're holding position. Then your friend Tormund can shift the main camp north, closer to the foothills. If the Bolton riders realize our lines have thinned and try to pursue, we'll have prepared a trap, or at least an ambush site. Let them see what it means to challenge House Umber on our own land, especially if the free folk stand by us. See. John's stomach still felt knotted, but this was a plan, a real plan. We have to act quickly, he said. The people won't last much longer in the open. Harrion took a long breath. Then we start at once. Baron, gather 6 of your best. Prepare horses, rations enough for a few days. Jon Snow, you'll leave within the hour. I'll send word to my captains in the field to begin repositioning. Jon let a rare wave of gratitude wash through him. Thank you, he said quietly. I won't forget this. Harrion waved the sentiment aside. I'm not doing it out of charity. I want the Boltons kept out of my lands. And my men want to see the free folk gone from our doorstep before panic spreads. We stand to gain if we can coordinate. Still, for your father's memory, I'll say I'm glad it's you who came and not some other man. Jon met Harrion's gaze and offered a small nod. Ned Stark's memory still carried weight in the north, even in this uncertain era. If that helped unify them against a common foe, so be it. Better that than more pointless bloodshed. He looked to Wyn, Body, and the others. Get ready, he told them. We ride soon, and once we're with Tormund, we'll have to move fast. Body smiled grimly. At least we're doing something. I prefer the saddle to a cell. Wyn gave a slight grin. Let's hope your friend Tormund hasn't started a brawl already. Jon tried not to let the possibility unnerve him. Tormund had a short fuse, but he also had a healthy respect for Jon's leadership. If Tormund had kept the free folk together this long, perhaps fortune would hold a little while longer. We'll find out soon enough, he said, turning back to Harrion. We'll gather our gear. Harrion signaled a guard to escort them. Go on then. Baron will wait in the courtyard. We'll have some spare cloaks and supplies for you. One last thing. He paused, leveling Jon with a stark look. If the Bolton loyalists catch wind of this, you may be ambushed. Don't expect us to charge to your rescue. The path is too narrow, and we need to maintain the ruse in the clearing a while longer. I can't risk committing more men until we're sure of success. Jon accepted that harsh truth. Understood. They left the hall, hearts beating with renewed urgency. The guard led them back to their chamber, where they collected their belongings, what little they had brought, and prepared for a hasty departure. Jon took a moment to tighten the straps on Longclaw's scabbard, the worn leather mold fitting comfortably to his body. Wyn slung her spear across her back alongside a small bag of supplies, and Body strapped on a battered steel helm that looked too large for him, but provided some semblance of protection. The others did similar checks, tying on daggers, adjusting furs and cloaks to guard against the bitter wind. When they descended to the courtyard, they found Baron waiting beside 6 stocky northern horses, each saddled with thick blankets and small packs of rations. Baron was a lanky man with untamed brown hair and an intense gaze. Around him, a handful of seasoned-looking Umber scouts lingered with watchful eyes. The sky overhead was heavy with a flat gray light, the threat of more snow looming. It would be a cold ride through the forest. Baron greeted Jon with a curt nod. We'll move northwest first, then skirt the main road from the east. There's a ravine we can follow. The climb will be rough, but the trees will hide us from any watchers. Jon eyed the horses. Are you sure we can get them through a ravine? Baron shrugged. They're used to rough terrain. We'll lead them on foot in parts if needed. Best keep them quiet too, or we'll give ourselves away. Jon and his companions mounted up, though Wyn elected to walk at first, leading her horse by the reins. Baron set a brisk pace out the gate, and 2 Umbers cranked the chains to let them pass. Snow whirled as they rode away from Last Hearth, the fortress behind them looking stern and unyielding. Jon cast a final glance back at the gray ramparts, wondering how soon he'd return, and under what circumstances. They traveled for hours. The wind lashed them, carrying ice that stung exposed skin. True to his word, Baron guided them along narrow trails that wound between ancient pines. Their branches weighed with snow so thick it sagged. Occasionally, the path dipped into rocky gullies, or climbed steep ridges. They forded a half-frozen creek, the horses stepping gingerly on the slippery stones. Conversation was sparse, lost in the howling wind or simply spared to conserve breath. Every so often, Baron held up a hand, signaling silence, and they listened for any sign of hooves or distant shouting. Nothing. The forest remained eerily quiet, aside from their own passage. Midday came and went. No one spoke of stopping for a meal. There were no comforts to be had in the heart of this winter wilderness, and every hour counted. Jon kept one hand near Longclaw's hilt, scanning the shadows for any threat. His thoughts drifted again and again to the clearing. Had Harryon's men begun to pull away? Had the Bolton loyalists noticed? Were Tormund and the Wildlings still huddled in the cold? Or had they already been forced to defend themselves? Beren led them up a slope so steep that at times they dismounted and scrambled on all fours, guiding the horses carefully. The air was thin, the wind keener at this elevation. Near the top, a shelf of rock jutted out, offering a vantage point over a stretch of forest below. Jon crouched at the edge, peering down. He saw faint smoke in the distance. Campfires? Possibly. He exchanged a look with Wyn, who shook her head as if to say she wasn't sure. Beren joined them, brow furrowed. That might be the Bolton camp, he muttered. They appear to have moved. If so, they're inching closer to the clearing. Jon clenched his jaw. Could they be preparing an assault? It's possible, Beren replied. Or maybe they're just tightening their watch. Hard to say. Jon nodded, unsettled. We have to pick up the pace. If Tormund's there, we need to reach him before the Boltons do. And they continued their descent, the terrain shifting from craggy slopes to denser woods. Twilight crept in, casting long shadows across the snow. Beren insisted on pressing on, confident in his familiarity with the paths. The temperature dropped further, making each breath burn in Jon's lungs. Sweat froze on the back of his neck where his cloak parted, and his legs ached from guiding the horse through uneven ground. At last, they reached a small hollow, encircled by thick firs. A faint path meandered to the south, presumably toward the clearing. Beren paused, gesturing for quiet. He dismounted and crept forward, scanning the gloom between the trees. Jon did likewise, leaving Ghost's usual place beside him conspicuously empty. He missed the direwolf's presence, but Ghost was with Tormund, hopefully serving as a guardian for the freefolk. They heard muffled voices on the wind, too distant to make out words. Beren motioned them onward, and they advanced cautiously until they emerged on the edge of a ridge that overlooked a wide expanse. Through the thinning trees, they glimpsed the faint glow of campfires. Two clusters of light flanked the open field, presumably the Bolton loyalists on one side, the Umbers on the other. And in between, scattered campfires formed the heart of the free folk's position. Relief and anxiety struck Jon at once. The free folk were still there, apparently unscathed. But it also looked precariously close to a pitched battle. Torches swayed among the trees. Horses snorted. The tension remained thick in the air, as if one misstep could unleash chaos. Jon scanned for any sign that Harryon's men were pulling away, but it was hard to tell from this vantage in the dim light. He turned to Beren. We have to get down there without drawing attention. Beren nodded. We'll go around the ridge's base. There's cover in the pine grove. If we skirt the open ground, we can slip into the Wildling camp unseen by the Bolton watchers, assuming they don't have scouts posted. Jon's heart pounded. Let's be quick. We'll lead the horses on foot to minimize noise. Never Baynar. They secured the horses in a thicket, tying them to low branches and muffling their muzzles with scraps of cloth so they wouldn't whinny. Then they proceeded in single file, stepping carefully through the snow-laden undergrowth, each breath tight with anticipation. The voices and clang of metal carried on the wind, fading in and out. Occasionally, they glimpsed a torch bobbing in the distance. Wyn pointed to a cluster of twisted oaks. We can use that as a landmark. Looks close to the camp. Mary? Jon nodded, pushing past branches that scratched at his cloak. His boots sank into icy drifts. At one point, Body nearly slipped down a small ravine, barely stifling a cry as he caught hold of a tree trunk. Minutes stretched on like hours, but at last they found themselves at the edge of the free folks' encampment. Dim fires glowed among crude tents of hide and fur. Figures huddled around them, cloaks drawn tight. A lone sentry with a battered spear stood watch, half dozing on his feet. Jon felt a pang at the sight. These were weary, desperate people. Yet they had endured. He emerged from the shadows, calling softly, "Friend." "We're friends." The sentry jolted, raising his spear, only to gasp at the sight of Jon's face. "Jon Snow," the man exclaimed, eyes wide. "Gods, we thought you lost or captive." "A bit of both," Jon replied, stepping closer. "Where's Tormund?" The sentry jerked his thumb deeper into the camp. "Near the big bonfire, I think. Keeping watch." Jon beckoned Wyn, Body, and the others to follow. Beren and the Umber scouts hung back, not wanting to alarm the free folk with their presence. Carefully, Jon moved between tents and clusters of sleeping families. Most recognized him with a start, but in their exhaustion, they merely nodded or murmured a greeting. At length, Jon found a large bonfire near the center, though the flames were low, nearly reduced to embers. Tormund sat on a log, hunched forward, his unruly red beard catching the faint glow. He looked up sharply at the sound of Jon's approach, his eyes going wide. "Jon Bloody Snow," Tormund muttered, half rising. "You're a sight for sore eyes. I was beginning to think you'd woken up in an Umber dungeon for good." "Norvin." Jon grasped Tormund's forearm in greeting. "I nearly did. Harry Umber held me, but he's agreed to talk. More than talk, actually. There's a plan." Tormund's expression flashed between relief and suspicion. "A plan? You mean a plan that doesn't involve us freezing while those flayed man-fools keep watch?" He jerked his head toward the far side of the clearing, where the Bolton banners fluttered in the cold wind. Jon glanced around. Dozens of wildlings dozed in whatever meager shelter they'd fashioned, or else sat in anxious clusters. Ghost lay near Tormund's feet, raising his head at Jon's scent. The direwolf stood, patted over, and pressed his nose into Jon's side in silent greeting. Jon stroked Ghost's white fur, heartened by his companion's warmth. "What's happened here since I left?" Jon asked softly. Tormund wiped the back of his hand across his mouth. "We've been pinned. The Umbers stayed on one side, the Boltons on the other. Just a few patrols, no real fighting, yet. But everyone's on edge. That hooded bastard leading the flayed men threatened to charge more than once. The only thing stopping him is that the Umbers keep a line between us, as if to say, 'You'll have to go through us first.' That's unusual, considering they were the ones who penned us in to begin with." Jon let out a slow breath. "So Harrion must have been stalling the Boltons, waiting for a chance to reorganize." "Harrion's pulling most of his men back," Jon explained. "They're leaving the clearing, going north to Last Hearth. We're to move the free folk as soon as possible, preferably tonight. We'll slip around the Boltons' flank and set up near the foothills. The Umbers plan to draw the Boltons in, and possibly trap them if they pursue." "Daddy de Montebear," Tormund considered. "That's better than rotting here, but we have many families, children. How do we move without the Boltons noticing?" Jon beckoned to Wyn and the others behind him. "We've got scouts. Beren, an Umber who knows the land, is nearby. He'll guide us through the woods while the Umber lines thin out. The Boltons might suspect something, but if we move quietly in the dark, we might avoid a direct battle." "Now when tell?" A grin tugged at Tormund's bearded cheeks. "Finally, I was tired of waiting to see who'd lose their nerve first." They wasted no time. Tormund roused key chieftains, Morna Stone-Eye, who looked both relieved and annoyed that Jon had taken so long, and others who carried influence. In hushed tones, Jon explained the new alliance with Harry and Umber. Some met this with skepticism, remembering how the Umbers had once warred against their kind. But Jon's conviction, paired with Tormund's support, carried enough weight to push them forward. If it meant avoiding immediate conflict and finding a path to real settlement, they would follow. Quietly, they spread the word to break camp. Mothers shook children awake, men doused fires, old folks gathered their scant belongings. The snap and pop of a few embers carried on the cold breeze, but otherwise the free folk moved like ghosts among the tents. Once they had their gear together, Tormund signaled a handful of scouts to slip around the perimeter and watch for any sign of movement from the Bolton lines. Meanwhile, Jon stepped away from the center, waving Beren forward from where he and the other Umbers had hidden among the trees. Beren appeared, face taut, scanning the mass of wildlings with cautious eyes. Jon introduced him to Tormund quickly, and the two men exchanged curt nods. Then Beren outlined the route. A narrow defile running west of the clearing, hidden by thick underbrush. Then a broader path that curved north around a ridge. It would be tough going in the dark, but if they kept disciplined, the free folk could move without attracting much attention. All the while, Harryon's men, those left behind, would maintain the semblance of a blockade, as though nothing had changed. Tormund grunted. We'll have to keep torches low or risk giving ourselves away. With so many children, that won't be easy, but we'll manage. Descend and white. Morna Stone-Eye tapped the butt of her spear against the frozen ground, the single orb of her good eye glinting. At least it's better than waiting to be slaughtered here. She turned to Jon, voice softer. I'm glad you came back. Another day of this and we might have fought our way out on our own with heavy losses. Jon inclined his head. I'm glad, too. He imagined the chaos if they had attempted to break through the Bolton line without the Umbers' help. It would have been a bloodbath. Now, at least, they had a chance. Under the stars' pale glow, the entire wildling host began to move. Children gripped adults' hands, stumbling through drifts. Warriors formed a ragged perimeter, each glancing anxiously at the distant flicker of Bolton torches. Jon's heart pounded at every crack of a branch or jingle of a harness. One misstep, one unlucky moment, and the Bolton riders might realize what was happening. The hush became almost unbearable, as though every man, woman, and child held their breath in unison. They made it to the edge of the clearing, where the forest thickened. Beren waved them onward, quietly instructing them to follow in single file wherever possible. Snow muffled their steps, though children coughed and whined in the cold. Occasionally, Tormund or Morna had to hush them gently. Jon walked near the front, Ghost prowling at his side, wind close behind. The path was winding, full of half-frozen brush that caught on cloaks and clothing. A few times, a child stumbled or someone cursed under their breath at snagged boots. Jon's mouth went dry every time, worried the sound might carry, but the night remained still. At length, they heard a muffled shout from somewhere in the distance. Tormund froze, raising a hand for silence. Jon and the others waited, hearts pounding. The shout came again, faint. It seemed to come from the Bolton lines. Had they spotted the movement? Or were they simply rotating guard shifts? Minutes crawled by in excruciating stillness, but no sudden assault materialized, no horn blast sounded. Slowly, Tormund waved them onward. They reached the narrow defile Beren had mentioned, a small ravine choked with deadfall. The free folk carefully descended, helping each other over tangled roots and rocks, slick with ice. Horses or sledges might have been helpful for carrying the sick and the elderly, but in this terrain, it was impossible. Everyone had to rely on foot. The ravine twisted and turned. At one point they had to squeeze through a gap that forced even children to crawl. Yet no one complained. The final push to freedom was too near. Jon marveled at how fluidly the free folk moved as a group, testament to the countless hardships they'd endured beyond the wall. Women carried infants strapped to their chests. Men shouldered bundles of hides and meager food. Older children helped guide the younger. Even the wounded limped along, assisted by neighbors. They truly were a people bound by survival, rather than titles or banners. He only prayed that survival would mean more than running from one threat to the next. Hours slipped by. It felt like they'd traveled half the night by the time the ravine opened onto a wide stretch of forest undergrowth. Above, the sky began to show the faintest hint of gray, indicating that dawn crept closer. Weary and chilled to the bone, they pressed on. Beren paused occasionally to scan for signs of pursuers. Each time, he shook his head, relief flickering over his features. Eventually, the terrain sloped gently upward, leading toward the foothills that Harrion had described. Ridges of rock rose, covered in thin pine forests, forming a natural barrier. In a few hours, the free folk could establish a makeshift camp among the thick trees, hidden from any casual observer. Then, once dawn fully broke, they could send out small hunting parties, gather more wood, and at least keep everyone from freezing. It was not a permanent solution, but it was far better than being trapped in that clearing. When they came upon a small clearing ringed by pines, Beren stopped, turned to Jon, and gave a faint nod. "We're beyond the Boltons' patrol routes." Harion's men will continue to keep them guessing. You should be safe here for a time. Build no large fires, and keep your people close. The real test will come when the Boltons figure out you've vanished. Vendaman. Jean's shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but a measure of relief poured in. Thank you, he said. You've done more than you had to. Baron shrugged. My lord commanded it. But I won't lie. I'd rather see the Boltons broken than see them rise again. Just keep your end of the bargain, Snow. Jon met his gaze squarely. I will. Baron took his scouts and withdrew, fading into the woods with the practiced silence of men who knew how to vanish. The free folk, equally weary, slowly formed a new camp. They used felled branches to clear space for tents and leaned small poles against tree trunks to fashion crude shelters. Tormund oversaw it all, bellowing instructions but with a tone that felt more like encouragement than anger. Morna and other spearwives spread out to keep watch on the perimeter, scanning for any sign of riders. Ghost drifted along the camp's edge, sniffing the wind. Jon helped a group of weary men and women lay down tarps of hide for children to sleep upon, brushing away the shallow layer of snow that coated the frozen ground. The children's faces were wan, but some offered shy smiles of relief at finally stopping. He knelt to speak with a mother who shivered in a thin cloak, offering his own heavier fur to drape over her shoulders. She murmured thanks, eyes bright with gratitude. That small moment crystallized his purpose, ensuring these people weren't forced to wander, forever unwelcome, forever threatened. Dawn brightened the sky gradually. When the first true rays of sunlight broke through the pine branches, they revealed the free folk scattered in small clusters of tents and blankets, families curled around fires carefully shielded by rock outcroppings. A hush of awe swept through them. Perhaps the day felt like a victory, however modest. Jon felt a stirring of hope. They'd slipped away from the Boltons, forging a small foothold. Step by step, the dream of coexistence might be within reach. Tormund thumped Jon on the back, nearly knocking him forward. Well done, Crow. I half expected arrows in our backs, but here we are. Dentro. Jon managed a tired grin. Now we prepare for the next move. Harion wants to coordinate. If the Boltons chase after us, we need to be ready. Tormund stretched, grimacing as his joints popped in the cold. So we're to fight alongside the Umbers if it comes to that? The same folk who wanted our heads a day ago. Jon gazed out at the sheltering pines. If it means the free folk can claim real land, yes. A strange alliance, I know, but it's better than dying under a flayed banner. Tormund nodded. I've seen stranger. I'll pass word. But these people need rest. The children especially. Then Munmer. Jon agreed, noting how many little ones had already dozed off. They'd marched for hours in the frigid night. A small respite was essential. Let them rest for now, Jon said. Then we'll send out watchers, maybe gather some game. We're short on food. A rasping voice cut in. And if the Boltons come, how do we signal? Or do we just blow a horn and hope you can rally in time? Morna Stoneeye stood nearby, spear planted in the ground. Jon rubbed his chin, stubble scraping his palm. We'll set watchers on the highest ridges. If they see riders, they'll light a torch or wave a cloth. We'll have to respond quickly, gather our warriors. A horn would echo too far. We don't want to lure the Boltons if they're not already on the move. Metre Soko. Morna grimaced but nodded. We'll do it your way. Jon let out a breath. Tension radiated from the free folks' leadership, but they understood that any immediate conflict would cost them dearly. He wondered how the Umbers were faring. Had they fully withdrawn from the clearing, leaving the Bolton loyalists to discover an empty campsite and no sign of thousands of wildlings? Likely that discovery would send the hooded leader into a fury. He might dispatch riders in all directions, scouring the forests for any hint of footprints or disturbed snow. He'd find something eventually. The free folk couldn't stay hidden forever, but they didn't need to hide forever. Only until Harion could muster enough readiness to challenge the Boltons directly. If a major battle was coming, Jon would rather face it on terms that favored the alliance. A defensive position in rough terrain, the free folk at his side. The Umbers able to harass from multiple directions. That might balance the scales even if the Boltons brought a sizable force. Time dragged through the morning. Some wildlings dozed. Others ate what little remained of the provisions. A few who still had energy ventured out to hunt small game. The forest offered minimal bounty this time of year. Perhaps a squirrel or a snow hare. Better than nothing, but nowhere near enough for the entire host. Jon felt the weight of that hunger pressing on him, though he couldn't fix it overnight, one step at a time. By midday, small plumes of smoke rose from a handful of carefully tended fires. Tormund and Morna returned from surveying the nearby ridges. Neither reported any sign of riders. Jon breathed a little easier, though he knew it was only a matter of time. That sense of uneasy waiting returned, reminiscent of the clearing. At least here, the free folk had chosen their ground, hidden from direct assault. In the early afternoon, a whistle sounded from the southern edge of camp, a short note repeated 3 times. Jon stiffened, hand on Longclaw. Tormund peered at him, brow furrowed. "That's one of our watchers, yes." Jon nodded, crossing to where the sound had come from. A young man named Carl, one of the Thens who'd integrated with the free folk, stood atop a boulder, shading his eyes from the weak sun. "Riders," he said as Jon approached. "Heading this way, from the south." Jon cursed under his breath, heart thumping. How many? Hard to say. Might be half a dozen. They're not flying a banner, and they're not wearing Umber colors as far as I can tell. Tormund joined them, axe in hand. Could be a Bolton scouting party. Jon's mind raced. Gather a small group of warriors. We can intercept them before they stumble on the whole camp. If they're Boltons, we'll decide what to do. If it's something else, we'll see. Mjolnir. Tormund gripped the haft of his axe. Let's hope they're not itching for a fight. Jon signaled Wyn and a few others, instructing them to form up quietly. Leaving Morna to keep the camp alert, he led the small band through the pines, aiming to intercept the riders. They moved quickly, their feet sinking into pockets of soft snow, or crunching over icy patches. Ghost raced ahead in silence, weaving between trunks. Even in broad daylight, the direwolf was eerily stealthy. They crested a small rise and peered down. Sure enough, 6 riders picked their way along a narrow trail, their horses' breaths forming clouds in the crisp air. At this distance, Jon couldn't see any distinctive sigil on their cloaks. A tall figure rode at the front, face partially obscured by a hood. Another wore a fur-trimmed cloak that looked suspiciously well made. Something you might see on a minor noble, not a typical sellsword or brigand. Jon motioned for his group to spread out, forming a semicircle. They crouched behind fallen logs and thick pines. When the riders were close enough, Jon rose, Longclaw at his side, calling out for them to halt. The lead rider yanked on the reins, nearly causing the horse to rear. The group fanned out, startled by the sudden appearance of armed wildlings. One pulled a sword halfway from its scabbard. Ghost snarled, stepping forward with his hackles raised. Jon lifted a hand to steady the direwolf. "Who are you?" he demanded. "You ride in dangerous territory." The hooded rider pushed back his hood, revealing a lean face with dark hair and a carefully trimmed beard shot with silver at the temples. He did not appear afraid, though tension laced his features. "We come seeking Jon Snow," he said. His accent suggested he was from somewhere in the central or western parts of the north, though not a lowborn man. "We heard rumors you'd led the free folk here, and we wish to speak." Jon's pulse jumped. "You found him. State your name and your business." The rider inclined his head. "I am Sir Meryn Lakes, sworn to House Serwyn, before it fell. My companions and I serve no lord at present, though we once fought alongside the Starks. We heard scattered news of a new warden, one rumored to be a Bolton, and of wildlings crossing the north. We came to see if there was a chance to stand against the Boltons before they seize control." "Nanorman?" Jon glanced at Tormund, whose eyebrows rose. This was unexpected. Could these men be new allies, or was it a ruse? "Where is House Serwyn now?" Jon asked. "Last I knew, their land suffered during the wars." Sir Meryn nodded somberly. "House Serwyn has few heirs left. Many died fighting for the Starks. The keep stands half empty. Some small folk remain, but they're fearful. We've been riding the north for weeks, seeking any glimmer of unity that might prevent a Bolton restoration. Men and so. John lowered Longclaw a fraction. I see. If you serve the Stark's memory, then you know my father was Ned Stark. A flicker of recognition lit Sir Meryn's eyes. Word spread far of Eddard Stark's bastard son, and how you once wore a crown as king in the north. We believed you fell in the wars or vanished. Now we discover you leading an army of wildlings. It's a long story, John said, but yes, I command the free folk for now. Our aims align with any who would resist the Boltons. We've forged a tentative alliance with Harry and Umber. Man, one of Sir Meryn's companions, a younger man, exhaled in relief. So the Umbers haven't bent the knee to the flayed man. Tormund let out a brief snort. Not likely. They were about as friendly as a hungry bear when we first met, but they hate the Boltons enough to see reason. Sir Meryn considered, eyes narrowing slightly. May we speak with you more openly? We carry no ill will. The 6 of us are scouts, but we have other men in the hills, maybe a couple dozen. Mostly ex-soldiers from houses that fell on hard times. We'd stand with any banner that truly opposes the Boltons. Nimmerkund. John's heart pounded with a new flicker of hope. Allies from another corner of the north, however small, could prove vital. We'll talk, he said carefully, lowering his guard. But you'll have to leave your horses and come with us on foot. My people are wary of mounted strangers. Sir Meryn didn't hesitate. Agreed. He and his companions dismounted, each glancing around warily at the circle of wildling spears. They surrendered their weapons for the moment, letting Tormund's men hold them until trust could be established. Then John led the group back toward the pine-shrouded camp, with Ghost at their side. During the walk, Sir Meryn spoke in hushed tones about the state of the north. He mentioned hearing that several houses were either too weak or too frightened to act, and that the new warden's emissaries had already demanded oaths from lesser lords. Some yielded out of fear. Others refused to even open their gates. No single unifying force existed anymore. How Stark was scattered. How Bolton was rising from its grave, and the great families that survived were licking their wounds or bickering among themselves. John's thoughts churned. If pockets of loyalists to the Stark cause still existed, like Sir Meryn and his band, maybe they could form a coalition. That was precisely what Harrion had hinted at. Gather enough support, and the Boltons would not be able to claim the north by intimidation alone. The free folk, ironically, might become a linchpin in that effort, providing the numbers and fighting prowess that many diminished houses lack. Back in the camp, John introduced Sir Meryn and his companions to Morna Wyn, and a few other chieftains. The initial mood was tense. Wildlings eyed these new men with open distrust. Tormund's heavy stare bore into them, as though waiting for any sign of treachery. But Sir Meryn and his fellows kept their manner respectful, each acknowledging the free folk as equals rather than savage outlaws. That small courtesy went a long way. They all gathered around a sheltered fire pit, where a freshly slain hare roasted on a spit. The meal was humble, and barely enough to feed a handful. But it served as a gesture of cautious hospitality. John noticed how Sir Meryn's men glanced around, taking in the hundreds upon hundreds of free folk scattered throughout the forest. No doubt they realized the scale of John's following. Still, no one showed hostility. We have men in the hills, Sir Meryn said again, speaking to Tormund as much as John. You'd accept our help. We can signal them to come down. It's not a grand army, but they're veterans, and they know how to fight. We'd stand with you against the flayed man. Man. Tormund grunted thoughtfully, chewing on a strip of hair. He paused before answering. We'll need every blade if it comes to a fight, but we need to make one thing clear. We're not here to kneel to any southerner, warden or otherwise. Jon Snow is trying to find us a home. You help him, we'll fight at your side. Sir Meryn nodded. We ask only that once the Boltons are driven out, you work toward peace, not conquest. Many small folk are weary of war. Wyn, leaning on her spear, chimed in. We're weary of war too. If we can live without being hunted, that's all we want. A sense of quiet acceptance settled over the group. The conversation meandered to practicalities. Where to position men, how to gather supplies. Sir Meryn mentioned that some older cabins in the foothills could be used as storage or shelter, though they hadn't been occupied for years. Jon nodded, seeing the possibility of a small hidden base where they might stockpile goods and nurse the sick or wounded. Every detail mattered. As the afternoon wore on, the sun dipped behind ragged clouds, and the shadows of pine stretched across the snow. Jon felt exhaustion settling into his bones, but adrenaline kept him functioning. He and Tormund stepped aside to speak in low voices about the next steps, contacting Harrion, preparing for a potential Bolton push, integrating Sir Meryn's soldiers. The tasks stacked up like stones, forming a wall that seemed insurmountable. Yet Jon knew they had to keep building, one stone at a time, or the entire effort would collapse. Tormund clapped Jon's shoulder, harder than necessary. You realize you've gone from crow to warden yourself. Half the North might look to you if this keeps up. Jon shook his head. I never wanted a crown. I only want the free folk to survive. Tormund let out a booming laugh that drew curious glances. You say that, but maybe the North needs a strong hand from a man who understands both sides. Stranger things have happened. Jon couldn't help the slight twist of a smile. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we deal with the Boltons and secure a safe place for our people. Tormund nodded, still smiling. Aye, but it never hurts to plan big. His grin faded into something more serious. I'm proud of you, Jon Snow. You've done more than any crow or kneeler would for us. Ygritte would be proud too, I think. A quiet ache filled Jon's chest at the mention of Ygritte. He pictured her face, the fierceness in her eyes, the warmth in her smile. I hope so, he murmured. I'm doing this for her in a way, for all those who died believing in something better. They let that memory hang in the air for a moment, then resumed their discussion. The rest of the day was spent making small fortifications, stacking dead branches in a crude barrier at the perimeter, posting sentries along higher ground. Sir Meryn dispatched 2 riders on foot, carrying a simple coded message to beckon his men down from the hills. Morna organized a group to search for any streams that might yield fish or fresh water. The entire camp pulsed with the controlled chaos of preparation. Dusk deepened. Fires glowed more boldly now that the immediate danger of detection seemed less. Jon walked among the tents, offering reassurance where he could. Some of the children recognized him, crowding around to ask if they would soon have a home with warm beds. He answered gently, though he kept his words cautious. We're working on it. The last thing he wanted was to promise too much. Night arrived in a hush. Clouds obscured the moon and stars, leaving the forest draped in a heavy darkness, broken only by the flicker of firelight. Jon settled near the largest fire, Tormund at his side. Ghosts curled at their feet. Wyn, Body, and a handful of other loyal companions gathered, sharing bits of dried meat and sipping from a skin of sour ale someone had found. It was not a feast, but it warmed the spirit enough to banish despair. Between bites, Jon considered what the next few days might bring. Lord Umber could send word at any time, perhaps a raven indicating that the Boltons were on the march, or an invitation to coordinate a pincer attack. Or the Boltons themselves might discover the Free Folk's new camp, forcing a quick evacuation or battle. And what of the other houses? House Glover, House Manderley, House Serwyn's remnants. Would they join, or would they cower behind their walls? So many uncertainties. Yet for the first time in many days, Jon sensed a genuine stirring of hope. There were those in the north who remembered Ned Stark's honor and had not bent to cruelty. Lord Umber was young, yes, but determined. Sir Meryn Lakes carried the battered banner of House Serwyn's old loyalty, and the Free Folk, so often dismissed as savages, possessed a fierce unity born from surviving the long night side by side with the men of Westeros. If they could hold together, if they could outmaneuver the Boltons, then maybe the North's darkest days would finally yield to something new. As the fire crackled, Tormund and the others drifted off to find a bit of rest, leaving Jon with Ghost. The direwolf lifted his head, ears perked at the night's sounds. Distant owls, the rustle of pine boughs. Jon reached to stroke Ghost's fur, feeling the sturdy muscle beneath. A wave of gratitude swelled within him. This bond had carried him through death and back. Now, in a time when he should have been an outcast, he was leading thousands toward a shared dream. Jon stared into the flames, letting his exhaustion wash over him. The future remained cloaked in shadow, but at least they'd made a step forward. Tomorrow, new challenges would rise, as they always did. But for tonight, he clung to the slim but vital hope that they were at last forging a path that might redefine the North and give the free folk a place they could truly call home.